Chapter 46 Cleaving a Body with One Blow. Chapter 46. Cleaving a Body with One Blow. Dr. Mo looked slightly astounded at his left hand, then returned his gaze to Han Li. He said disdainfully, "Interesting. It seems like you really didn't idle around for a year, even unexpectedly training in such a strange skill. But you did really think that you could become my opponent by relying on a few jack-of-all-trades skills? It seems I have not fought for a long period of time. Personally, taking part to exercise my limbs is not a bad idea. I will let you make the first move." Han Li did not pay attention to Dr. Mo's insult. He had already decided to gain the initiative by striking first. As the saying goes, be the first to act and take any opportunities. The short sword in Han Li's left hand was brought towards the front of his body, attracting Dr. Mo's gaze. But from his inner right cuff, he quietly slipped down a white paper bag, dropping it into the center of his right hand. After that, he lifted his hand to scatter a wide stretch of fine white powder from the white paper bag. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a thick white smoke that enveloped Han Li entirely, making his figure appear unclear and indistinct. Moreover, the white smoke quickly diffused throughout the entire house and made the whole room into a vast expanse of whiteness. Even if one were to hold his or her hand out, he or she wouldn't be able to see even his or her fingers. Han Li had strangely disappeared amidst the smoke. Dr. Mo wrinkled his brows. Han Li's move was beyond his expectations, but in his heart, he disregarded it. Because of his experience against this kind of third-rate trick, he had many ways to counter it. It was only because he was afraid that the smoke would prove to be troublesome that he held his breath. With his deep, profound skill, not breathing for 45 to 75 minutes was no problem at all. What insignificant talent. And you still dare to show off in front of me? Dr. Mo snorted coldly. Suddenly, his right hand slapped an empty spot within the smoke. The smoke stirred as if it were being hit by a large club, and it immediately surged upwards, revealing a large distinct hole. Though he could not see Han Li's silhouette, Dr. Mo did not stop. Striking everywhere from all sides, he released more than 10 strikes in a row, making the smoke in the house completely disperse out from the front door. The room returned back to normal apart from the missing Han Li. Strange. This brat truly has some ability. Even when I am in front of him, he can make himself disappear as if he had ceased to exist. Dr. Mo was astonished, but he did not panic in the slightest. He had kept a constant watch of the door and its vicinity. Even if a flea flew past, it would not escape his detection. He carefully ran his eyes across the entire house. The surrounding bookshelves, a desk and a chair were untouched. Everything appeared to be the same. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Thus, how could such a big fellow like Han Li disappear completely in a small place like this? Dr. Mo's expression changed. There were slight misgivings in his heart, but he boldly coughed a few times. He then unsteadily walked to the place where Han Li disappeared from, wanting to take a closer look at what actually happened. When he was a few feet away from the area where Han Li disappeared, he stopped and squinted both eyes. He faintly felt a discernible killing intent directed him from nearby, getting ready to make a move. Dr. Mo's eyes radiated energy that was used to carefully sweep the room. But even so, he was unable to discover anything abnormal. He began to worry that there was no one nearby. Could it be that Han Li decided to go up to heaven or down to hell? To go up to heaven or down to hell? Dr. Mo was completely lost in his thoughts and was thinking as if he had realized something critical. While he was pondering over it, there was a sudden, dang sound above his head. Not good. Dr. Mo suddenly realized that Han Li had concealed himself in the beam of the roof. He was unable to look up in time. With a shout, Dr. Mo raised his hand upwards and struck his palm severely to stun his opponent in one move. Following the powerful strike, an explosion rumbled out, but the only sound that was audible was sharp and clear, dang. Dr. Mo was somewhat puzzled and hurriedly lifted his head to inspect the beam. He couldn't help but to stare foolishly at the empty space above, where not even a ghost of a reflection could be seen. There was only a small black metal bell hanging from the beam of the roof, jingling incessantly in the wake of his strike. This was the source of the dang sound. Not even Han Li's shadow was there. During the time in which Dr. Mo was looking upwards, a wisp of cold light, with the abruptness of a thunderbolt, pierced violently towards Dr. Mo's lower abdomen from under his foot. Its speed was incredibly fast, comparable to lightning or raging fire. He was able to detect it only when it was about to touch Dr. Mo's garments. Dr. Mo turned pale with fright. In a great rush, he reacted instinctively and twisted his body. His whole body seemed as if it did not have a spine as he bent backwards, his body bending into the shape of an arch. This dangerous short sword blow just barely scratched his belly, making a small cut. It nearly slashed open his chest and eviscerated him. TL, the original Chinese says that he formed an iron bridge. Imagine him forming a bridge with his body by bending backward into an inverted U. After experiencing that attack, Dr. Mo did not dare to relax. As if the sole of his feet had contained springs, he jumped backwards several meters without changing his posture. Only after retreating did he dare to rise and look alarmingly yet furiously at the direction where the short sword's flashing light had emerged from, only to see that the ground where Dr. Mo had stood just moments ago began to slowly swell. Unexpectedly, the swell became bigger and taller until Han Li finally emerged. He had used a combination of soft bones art, breath control art, and false hiding technique. At that moment, Han Li's clothes were the same color as the yellow ground. His left hand carried the same short sword that had nearly hit Dr. Mo, and his eyes expressed an annoyed look. It seemed Han Li felt that it was a pity that he missed his target just now. Startled by the previous slash, his heart was beating madly from fear of that short sword. He was not an inexperienced recruit who had never faced danger, but even so, there were only a handful of instances during which he faced a near-death experience. What made this experience even more frightening was that it was caused by Han Li, whom Dr. Mo had always looked down upon with disdain. He took a deep breath, his expression finally becoming serene, and said in a dry and rough voice, "It seems that I have underestimated you, my dear young disciple. Your display of skill was not bad. You are truly worthy of me taking you seriously." After saying this sentence, Dr. Mo slowly raised both hands to his eye level and gazed tenderly at his hands without saying a single word. His gaze was similar to passionately looking at a lover. Forgetting completely about Han Li raised both his eyebrows and sneered. He grasped his short sword tightly in one hand and slowly approached Dr. Mo in small measured steps. Chapter 47 Demonic Silver Hand vs. Shifting Smoke Steps. Chapter 47 Demonic Silver Hand vs. Shifting Smoke Steps. Demonic Silver Hands. These three words rang out slowly from Dr. Mo's mouth as if they had drifted over from a faraway place. They possessed unfathomable demonic energy, causing Han Li to involuntarily freeze, halting his steps. Just as Dr. Mo's voice faded, a surge of immense killing intent seemed to explosively gush forth from Dr. Mo's body. The intensity of this killing intent was comparable to that of howling winds and torrential rains, increasingly getting stronger from all four directions, covering the entire residence. As Han Li strode forward, he clashed directly with the sudden surge of killing intent, and was involuntarily forced back a few steps before he could stable his body, standing upright. The expression on Han Li's face underwent a huge transformation as his heart rapidly sank. He knew that Dr. Mo had finally stopped underestimating him and thus decided to use an ultimate technique to deal with Han Li. It seemed like his encounter with Han Li's short sword had truly angered Dr. Mo. Hee. Little brat, to think you could witness my ultimate technique, the demonic silver hands. Your level of good fortune is normally accumulated over 3 lifetimes. TL. Last sentence is an idiom, the blessing of 3 lifetimes. Dr. Mo's ear-shattering roar still buzzed incessantly into Han Li's ear. Luckily for Han Li, Dr. Mo did not infuse the technique from earlier with his chi. Dr. Mo disliked using this method to achieve victory, causing Han Li to be slightly less worried. However, after hearing Dr. Mo boast about his ultimate technique, the demonic silver hands, Han Li could not help but stare at the hands of his opponent. After he looked, Han Li's face froze as he went slack-jawed, dumbstruck by what he was seeing. Dr. Mo's hands, originally as thin as tree branches, were swollen to more than twice their original size. What was even more terrifying was that his yellow and pallid skin had actually undergone a physical change and took on a silvery hue. Under the bright rays of the sun, it reflected a cold golden light, appearing to be indestructible and completely constructed from silver. This is Dr. Mo's true strength? After looking at Dr. Mo's hands, Han Li's heart sank even further. He clutched his short sword's hilt with a single hand while rivulets of sweat involuntarily appeared on his palms, causing his grip to be wet and slippery. His combat experience was severely limited, so a single new skill displayed by his opponent was sufficient enough to cause Han Li to worry, turning the atmosphere heavy. On the surface, however, Han Li appeared unaffected. With a calm countenance that did not reveal the slightest bit of worry, he seemed to look down upon the ultimate technique Dr. Mo was displaying. Dr. Mo was ultimately unsatisfied. He began to see Han Li in a whole new light, but he still felt that displaying his supreme technique in front of a young teenager was truly overestimating his opponent, akin to using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. As such, he initially expected Han Li to be frightened and beg him for mercy. Only then could Dr. Mo soothe his pride. "Do you know that I extremely hate the expression on your face? A brat who is still stinking of his mother's milk can act so bold as if he has everything under his control," Dr. Mo coldly stated, making no attempt to mask his disdain and hatred towards Han Li. "Oh, is that so? Letting old Mo feel disgusted is my honor. I think that in the future I should further nurture my talent in this area." Han Li sarcastically replied, hoping that his sarcasm would cause his opponent to slip up and give him an opportunity. However, Han Li's obvious intentions were seen through. Dr. Mo stopped speaking and slammed his palms together, causing a ping sound to ring out, similar to the sound of grinding metal. His intent was to cause fear in the heart of his opponent. Dr. Mo's figure shook as he leapt in the air and maneuvered his inflated silver palms. Like a raging wind and as robust as Mount Tai, he rushed towards Han Li. Dr. Mo did not intend to waste any more time to capture Han Li. He would unleash his ultimate technique through a single strike. With a heavy expression, Han Li focused his full attention on Dr. Mo's attacking stance. After Dr. Mo had leapt into the air, Han Li raised his hands and aimed at the weak point of any individual, his neck. Dr. Mo slightly gawked when he saw how audacious Han Li was. Han Li actually intended to face his hard technique head-on? Dr. Mo couldn't help but feel joy in his heart as he laughed manically. "Go to hell." He directed a silvery hand to catch Han Li's short sword and aimed his other hand at Han Li's shoulder blade. Both hands smashed through the air with frightening speed. However, although the palm strike towards Han Li's shoulder blade looked tyrannical and terrifying, Dr. Mo only used half of his strength in that strike, which totally contrasted with his shout earlier. He was worried that he would critically injure Han Li and ultimately be unable to use him in his plans. Han Li naturally did not know of the truth of this matter, and as such, he treated the attack very seriously. There was no way he would use his own body to test the toughness of his opponent's silvery hands. Instead, he lightly shook his wrist, causing the short sword to slash horizontally instead of drawing circles in the air. He intended to use this move to protect the upper half of his body. Dr. Mo snorted, but the trajectory of his hands remained unchanged, still relentlessly pursuing the short sword without the intent to evade. A crisp sound rang out as Han Li's short sword slashed into the silvery palm, causing a few sparks to fly. However, the short sword did not manage to leave even a scratch on Dr. Mo's palm. Dr. Mo made use of this opportunity. Flipping his palm, he extended a finger and flicked it against Han Li's short sword without giving Han Li the chance to retract his weapon. As Han Li felt an explosive tremor, part of his short sword's blade broke and flew far away, burying itself in the wall. The other silvery hand formed a claw that arched towards Han Li's shoulder blade, hoping to seal Han Li's movements and catch him alive. Although situation was rapidly taking a turn for the worst, Han Li showed no signs of panic. He slightly shifted his shoulders and sprinted forward, his body transforming into a column of smoke in front of Dr. Mo's eyes. Seeing such a vanishing body movement technique, Dr. Mo felt shock in his heart. However, he continued his attack, positioning both his hands in front of him like a screen to contain and block the smoke. He had no intention of letting Han Li escape. The smoke was truly abnormal. It hesitated for a moment before darting slightly in all four directions as if it were contemplating which direction to escape to. It moved in a strange angle and evaded the screen. In the blink of an eye, the smoke sped towards the leftmost corner of Dr. Mo's residence before stopping and transforming back into Han Li. Chapter 48 Lies. Chapter 48 Lies. Dr. Mo landed gently on the spot where Han Li had originally stood. Without pause, he turned around to face Han Li. The proud look on his face was gone. Instead, all that remained in Dr. Mo's eyes was shock. At this time, Han Li wasn't doing very well either. He kept inhaling deeply while sweat collected on his forehead. Although his face was pale, his cheeks were flushed with a strange red color. These were all signs that pointed towards one fact. The evasion technique that Han Li pulled to save his life had consumed most of his energy. It was highly probable that he would not be able to pull off the same trick the next time. Taking a deep breath, Han Li tried to relax his body in order to relieve his muscle strains from using shifting smoke steps. All he could do now was to make the most of any time to recover so that he would have a better chance of winning in the next exchange. Han Li glanced down again at his left hand, which was still slightly shaking. There was no way he could use his numb left hand to wield his short sword. It seemed that all the hard work he spent training himself to wield the short sword with his left hand was all for naught. He could only count on his right hand for the rest of the fight. When he thought about it, he smiled bitterly to himself. He lost most of his energy and couldn't use the marvelous shifting smoking steps anymore. Even worse, he could only use one hand to fight. Since the situation couldn't get any worse, he decided to use his trump card. Han Li looked at the sun outside the house, estimated its position, and thought that it was a good time to execute his next technique. He peeked again at the short sword stuck in the wall, and knew that it was impossible for him to get back his weapon. Dr. Mo wouldn't let him just go and take it back. Han Li mumbled for a little bit and pulled out another weapon from his bag. This one was also a half-foot short sword with a scabbard, but since it was too short, it was more fitting to call it a dagger instead of a sword. When pulled out of its scabbard, it looked like a normal dagger with an abnormally thick blade that had been polished and sharpened. Han Li threw the scabbard aside and switched the dagger to his right hand. He extended his right arm, pointing the dagger at Dr. Mo in an offensive stance. Dr. Mo saw what Han Li was doing, but he didn't hurry to attack. He put both of his hands on his back and spoke softly with a kind face. Han Li, you surprised me when you repeatedly dodged my attacks, but do you think your luck will last forever? The movement technique you used just now was quite good, but it has its own limitations. Judging by your physical strength, it's impossible for you to pull it off again. Just surrender like you should have in the beginning. You should be able to see by now that I have no intention to seriously hurt you. Just listen to me, maybe it won't be as bad as you thought. Dr. Mo's change of attitude made Han Li have goosebumps all over his body. He had changed from a gentle teacher to a cold-hearted and unfeeling figure. Now he was using meaningful and heartfelt words to try to convince Han Li to surrender. Han Li didn't know what to say. Dr. Mo actually thought Han Li would be that stupid and fall for this obvious lie? However, his words caused Han Li to gain some confidence. Dr. Mo wouldn't have used this childish trick to fool Han Li if he wasn't growing desperate. Han Li thought seriously for a while. He then signed and shook his head. Without a word, he waved his dagger at Dr. Mo and showed him his refusal. Dr. Mo's veins on his forehead suddenly bulged. Seeing Han Li ignore his words and use his weapon to provoke him, Dr. Mo couldn't suppress his anger any longer. You don't know what's good for you. He quickly took a big step forward and ferociously said, so close yet so far apart. Chapter 49 Hidden Within Concealment. Chapter 49 Hidden Within Concealment. Once both parties were about to make contact, Han Li slightly moved the edge of his dagger. The blade's angle had only shifted slightly, but in Dr. Mo's eyes, his whole world had turned into chaos due to this seemingly minuscule but earth-shaking change. The small light reflected on the dagger's edge suddenly gave rise to a dozen extremely dazzling white balls of light. The radiance was incomparably intense, and Dr. Mo could not stop it from shining directly into his eyes. Not good. He secretly cursed in his heart as he hastily retreated backwards, immediately shutting his eyes. But by then it was too late. The white light had already entered his eyes and prevented him from attacking. In that instant, Dr. Mo felt his eyes heat up, and his eyeballs began to ache incessantly. Tears dripped down from his eyes without restraint, and he had no time to wipe them away. He endured the discomfort with much difficulty and strained to open his eyes, but all he could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. Even an object's silhouette appeared like the layers of a mirage, fuzzy and indistinct. He instantly felt angry and frightened. Because of his own carelessness, he regretfully fell for his opponent's crafty trick once again. However, Dr. Mo had traveled the country for a long time and thus had plenty of experience in handling various kinds of dangerous situations. He continuously retreated several steps backwards to try and gain some distance away from Han Li and buy himself some time to recover. Simultaneously, he withdrew his palms to the front of his body and waved them relentlessly. Relying on the invulnerable demonic silver hands, he protected the crucial areas of his upper body. He had already decided that before his eyes recovered, he would not take the initiative to attack. Any offensive attack would have to wait until he could see clearly again before making a move. Dr. Mo was aware that he was yet again caught within the brat's trap. Currently, Dr. Mo's contempt for Han Li had disappeared from his heart. The level of danger in his struggle against Han Li was not inferior to the life-and-death battles against formidable opponents from his earlier years. Even though he could not see Han Li's movements, Dr. Mo twitched his ears and listened with rapt attention, trying to use his sense of hearing to determine Han Li's next move. Suddenly, Dr. Mo vaguely saw a shadow flash by. Shortly after, there was a sharp noise and a surge of cold wind coming from his front. Dr. Mo did not panic at Han Li's attempt to assassinate him. Instead, he was delighted. Han Li's strategy was somewhat naive. If Han Li had silently hid at one side to mount a sneak attack, Dr. Mo would have truly been worried. However, there was nothing to fear from a bold frontal attack. He had already trained his hearing to the point of perception, able to distinguish between the sound of wind, a thrust of a dagger, and an attack from an embroidery needle. He was able to hear perfectly. Dr. Mo heard the noise clearly, but his hand deliberately slowed down to make a small opening in front of him. Sure enough, the surprise attack immediately changed direction, deviating from its neutral path and making a beeline for his throat. Dr. Mo grinned hideously. His right hand, which had been waiting the whole time, suddenly made a move. He quickly grasped firmly onto the edge of the blade as he did not fear the sharp edge of the dagger at all. Han Li was aware of the turn of events and violently exerted some force to pull the dagger back a few times. But in the grasp of the demonic silver hands, the dagger did not budge at all, making Han Li's attempts a waste of effort. Dr. Mo felt a little proud of himself, but he did not dare to be careless for a moment because he was afraid that Han Li would realize this chance and release his grip on the dagger to run away. Chapter 50 Aromatic Coiling Silk. Chapter 50 Aromatic Coiling Silk. Dr. Mo finally figured out why Han Li had been determined to keep the door open the moment he entered the room. Han Li's request foreshadowed his use of the sun's glare. Dr. Mo's opponent was of such a young age. How could he be this thorough? This meticulously calculated sinister chain of events made this old and experienced figure of Jianghu unable to fight back. Han Li's profound schemes did not match his age and experience. Could it truly be that this person was truly a natural genius, perhaps even a reincarnated prodigy? He pondered deeply. The more he thought about it, the more his fear grew. A cold sweat covered Dr. Mo from head to toe. Enduring this frustration, Dr. Mo grew far more wary of Han Li. He cautiously and solemnly faced the youngster. For a short while he did not dare to act again. Han Li also did not know why Dr. Mo was just staring at him without the slightest intention to attack. For a short while, both sides had silently decided to cease hostilities. They gazed at each other in anxiety. After a moment passed within this awkward atmosphere, Han Li suddenly started speaking. His sentence would leave Dr. Mo dumbstruck and distracted. "Elder Mo, why don't we make peace? Or how about I surrender? What do you think?" Saying this, Han Li swung his arms. He straightforwardly threw down his weapons and gazed at Dr. Mo with a smile, exposing rows of pure white teeth. Just like that, he donned the appearance of a simple and honest youngster from the countryside. Surrender? Dr. Mo originally believed that his ears had gone bad. However, he immediately reacted. Looking at Han Li's discarded awls, he did not have slightest degree of trust, so he fiercely asked, "What's your plan? Don't think that I would trust your false words. You want to surrender? You could have done that from the start. There was no need to wait until after we became irreconcilable adversaries. What else is up your sleeve?" Han Li looked at Dr. Mo with a smile and did not speak. Instead, he seemed to tacitly agree to his criticisms. These two had once more sunk into confrontation. After a short while, Dr. Mo seemed to think of an extremely funny matter. He unexpectedly lifted his body, put both hands on his abdomen and laughed at the top of his lungs. The laughter was unrestrained and tears flowed out from the corners of his eyes. Truly? This is truly interesting. I had actually forgotten such an important aspect. I had actually truly been the target of your traps, said Dr. Mo in an ambiguous manner in between his disjointed laughter. Han Li wrinkled his brow, but soon after, he smoothed it out. As he glanced outside the window, the corners of his mouth formed a strong smile, and he calmly said, "Elder Mo, don't you feel that this delay has gone on long enough? It's about time to finish this." Dr. Mo grew slightly distracted and stopped his hearty laughter. He slowly straightened himself and stiffened his face. With an expressionless face, he stared at Han Li for a long time before coldly replying, "I too feel that it is time to conclude this." The two suddenly calculated their respective chances of succeeding. In that split second, they both thought of ways to force their opponent to reveal their cards. After a moment of awkward silence, Han Li slowly opened his mouth. He held no other thoughts other than the confidence of being able to force Dr. Mo to concede. "Elder Mo, did you know that your life is already in my hands?" Han Li's words could leave a person utterly astonished. "My life is already in your hands?" Dr. Mo sneered. His face had an expression of distrust. "Don't you think that wound of yours is a bit peculiar?" "Nonsense. I took a careful look at it. Your dagger doesn't have. Dr. Mo refused to believe his words, but halfway through his own reply, his expression greatly changed. Chapter 51 Giant Man Displays His Might. Chapter 51 Giant Man displays his might. Once the aromatic coiling silk poisons the body, the toxin would enter the blood vessels and gradually spread throughout the entire body. Ordinary mortals would not be in any danger, but to cultivators, this poison would be extremely fatal after a short amount of time. The cultivator affected by the poison could not recklessly disrupt his or her internal true qi, or else the poison would flare up and cause the blood in the body to flow backwards, resulting in immense pain and suffering. However, if one was poisoned for a longer period of time, the toxicity would penetrate the body, making the situation worse. Even if a person managed to recover somewhat and properly control of his or her true qi, he or she would still have to consume the antidote on a daily basis. Otherwise, gradual changes would occur within the bones, causing the body's foundation to wither. The body would curl up, paralyzed and unable to move. Eventually, the body would melt into a pool of mud. Even more terrifying was that once the poison penetrated the bones, nothing could be done to extract it. The individual could only rely on long-term treatment in order to survive. The poison would not flare up for the time being, instead becoming like a thread of carnal love, forever plaguing the victim's body. The poison was made up of a variety of materials, many of which could be replaced. Although the end product would be the same, the specific toxicity would change according to the person who concocted it, making the poison unique to its maker. Naturally, the antidote would also be unique. Only the person who manufactured the poison would be able to prescribe the correct antidote and suppress its toxicity. Even if others knew the method of making the aromatic coiling silk, they would have no way of concocting an antidote specifically geared to combat the aromatic coiling silk that someone else had produced. This way, the poisoned individual's puny life would be within the hands of the one who poisoned him. Unable to rebel or resist, the victim could only be obedient. Dr. Mo racked his brain for any memories regarding the aromatic coiling silk, filtering through his vast knowledge. He then understood the reason behind Han Li's fearlessness. Dr. Mo sneered in his heart, but his facial expression did not change. He indifferently asked, "Is this your last trick? Brat, it seems you have ran out of moves, so just obediently admit defeat." Han Li's heart sank upon seeing no changes in Dr. Mo's expression. At this point, Han Li was sure he had miscalculated something since Dr. Mo seemed to have entirely disregarded his threat. Dr. Mo did not seem provoked in the slightest, making it seem that he truly paid no mind to the aromatic coiling silk in his body. Even more so, Han Li was clear that because of this, he was in a very disadvantageous position. It looked as if his opponent was greatly certain that he could seize Han Li. Seeing Han Li remain silent, Dr. Mo laughed and deviously looked at him before saying loudly, "Iron Slave, capture him for me." Once Han Li heard this, he immediately remembered that after entering the house, he thought that he had forgotten something very crucial: Iron Slave. However, he had no time to mull over it. Instead, Han Li used the tip of his toes to hook the awl that was beside his leg. It automatically jumped into his hand. In an instant, a large shadow rushed from the corner of the room with a fierce wind following close behind. Its speed was incredibly fast, and it appeared before Han Li in a second, rendering him unable to evade. Helpless, Han Li could only use the sharp awl in his hand to stab towards the shadow's lower abdomen. He hoped he would at least be able to resist for a while so that he could have a chance to retreat and recover his breath. The blades are inserted in both of his shoulders, both of his legs, his lower abdomen, and rest of the blades were embedded in front of his chest. When looked at from afar, Dr. Mo gave off the impression that his body was hacked apart and dismembered in the midst of chaos. Han Li didn't know whether he should be happy or terrified by Dr. Mo's self-mutilation. Could it be that method was a prelude to a very powerful martial art? Could Dr. Mo be using the powerful martial art to deal with Han Li? After Dr. Mo finished impaling himself, he entered into a state of meditation, no longer speaking a word and ignoring all distractions. Han Li's heart shuddered slightly. He felt that this was a divine opportunity to escape. Just when he wanted to make a move, however, he abruptly stopped, appearing to have realized something. Han Li smiled bitterly. How could he have forgotten the giant fellow not far from Dr. Mo's side? That giant fellow had always been observing Han Li's movements. How could he have the chance to escape? It appeared that before entering his meditative state, Dr. Mo had already planned out everything meticulously. He was unafraid of any tricks that Han Li might have up his sleeves. This strange giant fellow named Iron Slave, seemed to have originated from some place mysterious. His body was the same as Dr. Mo's demonic silver hands. The toughness of his body was such that even the fatal weakness of the male species, groin area, was impenetrable by sword or spears. All of Han Li's plans to escape was destroyed by the mere presence of this man. As Han Li was silently cursing the giant fellow in his heart, a change that seemed demonic in nature occurred in front of him. Dr. Mo's facial features started to twitch, followed by violent trembling of his whole body. His facial features contorted grotesquely, as if he was bearing tremendous pain. Along with the sinister blades impaled in his body, people observing would not help but be terror-stricken, as if that they could feel that there was an emergence of extremely chilled air rising in the room Dr. Mo was in. All of a sudden Dr. Mo stopped trembling. However, an extremely weird low-toned roaring noise emitted from deep inside his throat. This sound has the feel of a savage primal bestiality. At that instant, Dr. Mo appears to be no longer an old man but rather a terrifying primordial beast from the wilds. Following which, an even more horrifying thing happened. The ghostly mist that appeared on Dr. Mo's face a year ago materialized again. Compared to a year ago, the ghostly mist that appeared now was distinctly different. Other an increase in the volume, the color of the mist now was blacker than black. When it appeared on Dr. Mo's face, it was akin to him wearing a pitch-black mask obscuring his original features. Shadowy tentacles also started to emerge from the ghostly mist. In addition to this, the ghostly mist underwent a earth-shaking change. Amidst the shadowy tentacles, the black fog seemed to have gained texture, becoming shiny and velvety. It seemed to have a will of its own, expanding and contracting uncontrollably, giving the appearance of it dancing madly on Dr. Mo's face. Both hands of Dr. Mo assumed the lotus hand gesture, contorting into a strange position. His lips were moving slightly as if he were muttering some spell incantations, only that his voice was too low that Han Li could not catch what he said. Alongside of Dr. Mo's strange gesture, the ghostly mist on his face seemed to be extremely agitated. Just like pouring ice-cold water on a boiling hot pan, the ghostly mist started to surge and seethe, creating a lot of small tentacles that were writhing threateningly in the air. It seemed that they wanted to stop Dr. Mo from doing something. Just as the black fog was at its most saturated point, Dr. Mo suddenly opened his eyes. Despite the intense blanket of black fog, Han Li could still see Dr. Mo's eyes were full of vitality and concentration. 7 ghosts devouring the soul. Dr. Mo roared out the name of the secret art that he is planning to use on Han Li. Using an expression that was akin to looking at a precious newborn baby, Dr. Mo attentively studied his new shiny and velvety skin. After examining himself, he slowly closed his eyes, propping his chin against both of his palms and gently caressing it as if he were enjoying the long bygone feeling of youth. Looking at the narcissism that clouded Dr. Mo's features, Han Li felt like vomiting. He could not grasp what Dr. Mo was feeling right now, that intoxicating feeling of recovered vitality. Old man Mo, looks like you have fully regained your vitality. Let me congratulate you first. It seems that you no longer require Disciple's help, so could you possibly let Disciple off the hook? No matter what issues you have in the future, your Disciple would help you without question. Han Li was running out of patience. Up to now, he was still unsure of what methods Dr. Mo was going to utilize to deal with him. Han Li pretended to be ignorant and questioned Dr. Mo, hoping to know his fate before making any decisions. Chapter 54 Soul Lock Talisman. Chapter 54 Soul Lock Talisman. Han Li, you are really flexible, knowing when to make compromises and concessions. However, letting you go? Do you think it's even possible? Dr. Mo sneered. Han Li was shocked at the sound of Dr. Mo's voice when Dr. Mo spoke. His voice contained faint traces of charisma, anyone who listened a sense of attraction and contentment. Compared to his previously bitter and insipid voice, this was totally different. It appeared that in comparison to his current looks, the beauty of his voice was not any worse off. Surprisingly, this was the first time Dr. Mo ever called Han Li by his name. Although it does not mean anything much, it allowed Han Li to feel slightly appreciated as it was much better than being called little brat every single time. On the surface, one could not really sense any imperfections from the current Dr. Mo. Every single one of his movements was graceful beyond comparison. A handsome man indeed, there was no trace of the senile old geezer from back then. Han Li was sure that back in his youth, Dr. Mo relied on that face of his to dazzle countless females. So what on earth do you intend to do to me? Just tell me directly. Han Li was not a female and thus he was not affected by Dr. Mo's handsome face. Furthermore, Hanli could tell from the previous conversation that Dr. Mo seemed to have no intentions of sparing him, and as such, there was no need for Hanli to leave him with any pretense of cordiality. What do I intend to do? Ah. Dr. Mo leisurely stretched his recently revitalized body, coldly smiling without any intent to answer Hanli while taking out another unknown object. The unknown object was revealed to be a small holding pouch made from extremely fine silk. The glow reflected off of the silk was extremely radiant, just like the blazing flames of a phoenix. It was extremely eye-catching. Furthermore, the embroidery was exceptionally exquisite. One could certainly tell that this was no ordinary object. What could this small holding pouch contain? Could it be another bizarre artifact just like the sinister blades from before? Asking himself these questions, Hanli felt curiosity grow within his heart. Dr. Mo cut Hanli's silent speculations short by quickly opening the pouch of holding. Following this, he cautiously drew out a rumpled piece of yellow paper. Hanli was somewhat disappointed. However, he knew that the more ordinary-looking an item is, the more difficult would it be for him to anticipate its uses. Caution arose in his heart as he became extremely focused. Thinking back to the incomprehensible events that happened earlier and seeing this seemingly ordinary piece of yellow paper, Hanli was sure that there were bound to be countless enigmatic mysteries behind it. Dr. Mo gently held the piece of wrinkled paper between two of his fingers, carefully smoothing it with a serious demeanor. Hanli was now able to see that the piece of paper was not large, about the size of a palm and yellowish with a hint of mold, giving the appearance that this talisman had been created many years ago. The most noticeable thing was that the piece of paper was shining with a silvery light, materializing silvery wisps of lines in the air. The lines slowly formed into many strange symbols in the air. Hanli had absolutely no knowledge of these foreign symbols. The moment he saw them, however, his heart started to feel as if there were an unfathomable and mysterious energy pulsing within the floating symbols. Even the chi he obtained from the eternal spring arts was moving in his body erratically as if it sensed immense danger, leaving Hanli stupefied. Sensing that something was wrong, Hanli quickly focused all his attention on the strange symbols, hoping to understand the mysteries behind them. After one's acupoints are sealed, although one could not move, they are still able to feel numbness and itchiness. The current Hanli, however, was not able to feel anything. Waves of terror assaulted Hanli. He did not know how Dr. Mo was going to control his body and steal his identity. Was this considered a successful attempt? Don't rush, your body should still be able to sustain this state for a little while longer. Dr. Mo muttered, although Hanli was unsure about whether he was talking to Hanli or to himself. Chapter 55 The Third Person. Chapter 55. The Third Person. You truly are quite cunning, said Dr. Mo. If you were left to your own devices, even I would have some difficulty dealing with you. Dr. Mo spoke in a calm and unhurried tone as he lifted Hanli and carried him outside of the house. It was still very hot outside, which made Hanli realize that although he thought he had been in the house for a long time, the events had lasted shorter than he expected. Dr. Mo continued to effortlessly carry Hanli as if he were a weightless object, walking at a leisure pace until he passed the medicine garden and came upon a remote cliffside. The silent giant continued to follow Dr. Mo's footsteps, refusing to leave his side almost as if he were his shadow. Through his own eyes, Hanli was able to see that there was more to the cliff than met the eyes. Upon closer inspection, he realized that carved into the cliff was a stone room he had never seen before. This room was similar to the stone room Hanli had cultivated in before, but this stone room was covered with a layer of lime wash. From its rough appearance, Hanli judged that the room was constructed recently. He was certain that he would be able to smell the pungent smell from the lime wash. Afraid that somebody might come along and disrupt his plan, Dr. Mo ordered the giant, "Iron slave, stay outside and stand guard. If you see anyone near the house, kill on sight." He then easily opened the door and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His familiarity with the layout of the room suggested that Dr. Mo built this place himself. Hanli assumed that with the door tightly shut and closed windows, the room would be pitch black. But contrary to his belief, the room was filled with candles of many different shapes and sizes that were brightly illuminating the room to the point where it seemed as bright as the outside daylight. The room left Hanli speechless, but even if he wanted to say something, he was unable to control his body. Since he could not control his body, Hanli had no choice but to examine the interior of the room. He noticed a strange pattern in the center of the room. It seemed to be made of some sort of powder, but Hanli was unable to get closer look. At the edge of the strange pattern were fist-sized pieces of jade that glowed in the candlelight. With a glance, It was obvious that each piece of jade was a rare and priceless item. If an expert on precious stones were to see such priceless treasures set on the ground, he would feel such an immense heartache that he would be unable to sleep for several nights. At this time Hanli felt his body being roughly thrown by Dr. Mo. His body made a putong sound as he crashed into the center of the pattern with his body facing upwards. Unable to move his body, he could only capable of staring at the ceiling. To say the least, Hanli was extremely anxious from being unable to anything in his current situation. The fact that he failed to see any of Dr. Mo's actions made him unable to calm down and heightened his fear. The only consolation he had was that he was not facing the ground, or else he would have been unable to even look at the ceiling. Poo poo poo, sound of puffing. A string of strange sounds heightened Hanli's fear and confusion, but he soon realized that it was the sound of Dr. Mo blowing out several candles. Gradually the room became dimmed. Hanli did not know the purpose of this action, but he did not have much time to ponder on its meaning since Dr. Mo suddenly opened his mouth and said, "The method you mentioned, will it really work?" "Well, I'm betting everything on it," said Dr. Mo in a cold tone that sounded out of place. This caused Hanli to be bewildered as he did not know if he was the one being spoken to. There were only two people in this room, him and Dr. Mo, so who else could he be talking to? Did Dr. Mo forget about the cursed yellow paper that prevented him from speaking? I guarantee it will work. After all, how could the 7 ghost technique that I passed on to you be fake? A new voice suddenly replied, seemingly out of nowhere. At this point Hanli was beyond being surprised at the sudden appearance of a new character, because all the strange things he experienced in the past few hours far exceeded the amount of strange things he heard in the past few years. Instead of being astonished, Hanli calmly deduced from the sound of the man's voice that he must be a young adult around the age of 20. What's the point if it ends up failing halfway? Tiel, Heng, is an exclamation, not the name of the mysterious man. Right afterwards, Dr. Mo released out a string of curses which caused no amount of shock to Hanli. This type of vulgarity was nothing special coming from Dr. Mo, but his sudden transformation into a pretty boy made his dirty words seem out of place, allowing Hanli to feel a hint of sardonic pleasure in his pitiful situation. If you suddenly pull a trick at the end and make me fall into your trap, who am I to turn to then? Not waiting for the young voice's reply, Dr. Mo continued on with a self-preserving tone. I don't want to hear your useless guarantees. I know you are already dead since I was the one who killed you. How could you not hold bitter hatred for me and try to look for any opportunity to gain revenge? Do you think you can deceive me? Not giving the other person any chance to refute him, Dr. Mo kept talking almost as if he were taking this chance to pour out all his pent-up thoughts and insecurities. The mysterious man did not react to Dr. Mo's spiel. As a result, the only audible sound within the penetrative silence of the stone room was Dr. Mo's breathing. Hanli couldn't help but break out into a cold sweat as he finally processed the fact that the mysterious young man was deceased. That would make him some sort of ghost, would it not? Also, from what Dr. Mo revealed in his tirade, it seemed that the weird technique he just used was learned from the man he had killed. The mysterious man finally replied angrily, "Well, what else do you want me to do? I already swore on my ancestors, my parents, my whole family, and even on my family name. Are you still not satisfied?" Hearing this, Hanli couldn't help but feel his heart jump a beat as he realized that the mysterious man was so perverse and demented that he would swear on so many of his family members just to gain Dr. Mo's trust. At first he felt a sense of connection as they both seemed to be in dire straits, but that feeling quickly disappeared from Hanli's mind. "You're right. You can't do anything to me right now since your body has been destroyed, leaving behind your soul. You can't even see the light of day, and what little strength you have left is useless against me," Dr. Mo said in a slow and deliberate manner in order to maintain his facade. Chapter 56 Battle of the Light Globes. Chapter 56, Battle of the Light Globes. Yu Zhitong, I just want to remind you again that if anything happened to me, you won't be any better off. You know that your soul won't last long in its current state and that you depend on me to help you look for a new body. So if there is anything you want to say it now while there is still time. I will not be angry unless it turns out you failed to tell me some crucial knowledge, said Dr. Mo as he was unwilling to give up any attempts at trying to pry out hidden information from the mysterious youth. From these words, it becomes evident to Hanli that Dr. Mo was in fact very afraid of Yu Zhiyong doing something at the final moment that would cause his downfall and was looking for more reassurance that his plans have not been tampered with. In response to Dr. Mo's words, Yu Zhitong, who fully understood the risks involved with harming Dr. Mo, replied smoothly, "There is no point in me tampering with your plans, and if I do then may my family suffer heaven's retribution." Besides, after using the 7-soul devouring technique at the price of your fundamental essence, you would temporarily receive a certain amount of magic power, enabling to use a few simple spells. But your existence now is currently that of a soul. Once your fundamental essence is used up, are you sure you could still execute such a spell? After Yu Zitong swore a venomous oath against harming Dr. Mo, he prodded at his weaknesses and leaving no way for Dr. Mo to back out. Although Han Li wasn't religious, listening to their dialogue made Han Li pray silently to the heavens that Dr. Mo would give up his evil plans. It seems like a ridiculous thing to do, but it was the only thing he could do. Okay, I will use what I trust and ignore what I don't. Since there are such great benefits, it is only natural that there would be some risks, said Dr. Mo after making up his mind. Hearing this, Yu Zitong seemed quite happy and excitement appeared in his words. See, that is the correct mindset. Think about it. You were originally a mere mortal without spiritual roots, unable to step onto the path of immortality. But if this plan becomes a success, that will no longer be the case. With your new body and powerful spiritual foundation, any large sect or clan would beg for you to join. Not only that, your body would be immune to sickness and death, allowing you to live 5 times as long as a normal mortal. Haha, then I will trust you on this matter. Do not worry, I Mo Jiren, am a man of my words. What I say will most definitely be done. Once I am successful in this endeavor, I will immediately help you find a suitable body with a strong spiritual foundation. I promise you that I won't let you down, little brother Yu. After listening to Yu Zitong's promises, Dr. Mo's initial worry was gone as he took up a kinder tone, addressing Yu Zitong with close familiarity. Then if that is the case, I thank Big Brother Mo. After your success, I will single-handedly teach you each and every one of the cultivation techniques I have in my possession, said the cunning Yu Zitong. He knew he had successfully lured in Mo Jiren with his words. Han Li listened as the two shamelessly talked about using his body without asking for his opinions. Even though he realized that he wasn't able to do anything given his current situation, he couldn't help but feel annoyed at how they don't give him any face. Once Dr. Mo dispelled his doubts and made up his decision to follow through with the plan, he no longer delayed, immediately pulling out some golden needles and stabbed them into his Mishua acupuncture point located in the back of his head. He was immediately invigorated, his body filled with enough energy to perform the next step of his plan and increase his chances of success. Upon realizing its disadvantage, the invader tried to turn and escape, but Han Li was unwilling to let it leave so easily and gave chase, biting at the fleeing invader. The invader was very tricky and slippery. Every time Han Li seemed to have caught it, the green globe would cut off the part that was caught and continue to flee. In the end, the invader managed to flee, but its body mass was 1/3 its original size. Although Han Li was reluctant to let his opponent go, there was nothing he could do about the matter and so decided to wait around for more enemies to invade so that he could also devour them. Sadly, no more globes of light came and he continued to float around. Chapter 57 Body Awakening, Enemy Perishing. Chapter 57 Body Awakening, Enemy Perishing. Hidden within the depths of his heart, an icy chill slowly appeared and quickly spread throughout Han Li's body, rousing Han Li from his stupor. When Han Li became clear-headed, the first thing he felt was an immense pressure in his head, followed by waves of pain across his entire body. He felt indescribably weak as one would feel at the onset of a serious illness, and he was unable to open his heavy eyelids no matter how much effort he expended. Still feeling a bit dazed, Han Li managed to recall the events that occurred right before he passed out. Han Li was struggling for control over his body when an immediate sense of panic flashed through Han Li's mind, causing adrenaline to flood through him, sharpening his befuddled mind and allowing him to quickly assess the situation around him. He exclaimed in shock as he realized that his mind had not been taken over by Dr. Mo. True, he could barely move his eyelids, not to mention the rest of his body, but the waves of pain spreading throughout his body told him clearly that he had regained control over his own body and that Dr. Mo had failed in his plans. Why did Dr. Mo's plan fail? Did he do something wrong? Filled with surprise, Han Li was able to think of one plausible explanation for his current situation. Barely containing the excitement within his heart, Han Li patiently waited for his body to regain some of its energy before he tried once more to open his eyes. After a short but strenuous battle, he managed to crack open his eyelids to see what was going on around him. The first image he saw when he opened his mind was the sorry state Dr. Mo was in. His hair was all white, his face was thin, wrinkled, and haggard. It seemed like he was at least 10 years older than he was before his youthful transformation. With this appearance, it was impossible to imagine him any older. His features seemed to embody the meaning of the word old, and he was now simply a poor old man. In front of Han Li, Dr. Mo's eyes were wide open as he stared at Han Li with a look of unbridled terror. Han Li himself was equally shocked, and his muscles immediately tensed. All sense of weakness left his body as the only thought that rang out within him was to make the first move and gain the upper hand. Clearly learning from his previous lesson, Han Li was unwilling to once again fall under someone else's control. But afterwards Han Li realized something strange. His opponent's face seemed to be frozen in fear and there was no sign of breathing from Dr. Mo. It became apparent that he was dead and may have been dead for quite a while now. Unwilling to let down his guard, Han Li continued to stare deeply, with eyebrows furrowed, at Dr. Mo's facial features in search of anything that might give him away. After a whole 30 minutes of careful scrutiny, Han Li was forced to admit that Dr. Mo was indeed dead, for he did not hold any resemblance to that of someone who was still alive. Hesitating, Han Li carefully crawled up to him and stretched out one hand to grasp Dr. Mo's wrist while his other hand was placed under his nose. In this position he waited for a while, but there was still no reaction. It was only with this final affirmation of Dr. Mo's death that Han Li felt his heart settle and relax. The sense of oppression he had felt in his heart was finally discarded. Until now, Han Li had always carried some doubts within his mind, as he did not believe his biggest enemy, the cunning and crafty Dr. Mo, would die so easily from an unknown cause of death. Han Li scratched his forehead, only to realize that the soul lock talisman, which had been fixed to his forehead, had disappeared without a trace. This made Han Li feel strange. He would later learn about talismans and sealing techniques, and only then would he realize what had happened. It seems that all the power in the yellow talisman had been used up and thus it had disintegrated into dust, so Han Li was unable to find it. The now relaxed Han Li decided to continue being cautious and started to scan the area around Dr. Mo to see if there were any traces of life. Han Li noticed that the candles were still lit, signaling to him that he had not been out for a long time. The jade pieces, on the other hand, had lost all their previous luster and seemed to have been degraded, unable to catch anybody's eyes. Shifting his attention towards the left side corner of the stone room, he focused on an object that had previously evaded Han Li's detection. Han Li was not a stranger to this object. This object was the invading green globe from his dream that had managed to escape from his grasp, but not before having 1/3 of its mass devoured by Han Li. At this time, it desperately tried to dig into the corner of the room, apparently afraid of Han Li and trying its very best to hide from his sight. Amused, Han Li looked at this scene with one hand stroking his chin. Then he quickly stood up and strode over to the ball of light. Only when he was half an inch away from the ball of light did he stop and slowly open his mouth. "I think we both know each other. You should be Yu Jitong. Am I correct?" The green light, which contained Yu Jitong, started to tremble and flicker at the sound of Han Li calling its name, but after pausing for a moment it started to shine brightly again. "You guessed correctly. It seems you truly are Dr. Mo's disciple. You are just like him, tough and hard to deal with," said the ball of light, accepting its fate. From its voice, Han Li could tell that it really was the young man whom Han Li heard conversing with Dr. Mo. It did not try to hide its identity and instead confirmed Han Li's thoughts. Now knowing what he was dealing with, Han Li asked, "Since you were one of the culprits trying to take my life and possess my body, shouldn't you provide me with an explanation?" Han Li did not reveal any anger as he talked to the culprit. Instead, he had a rather calm demeanor. Even so, Yu Jitong, seeing Han Li's indifferent attitude, was at a loss regarding what to do, feeling a sense of dread within his heart. In the recent battle between their two souls, he experienced firsthand Han Li's might and even had a portion of his soul devoured, causing his internal chi to drop by half. The remaining half of his internal chi could only be used to perform minor incantations that had neither the power to kill Han Li nor the power to protect himself, allowing a sense of fear to ingrain itself within his heart. "What do you want to know?" He knew that Han Li had recently escaped from a life-threatening situation and therefore would not be emotionally stable. Although he may look calm and collected, who knows how he was truly feeling. In a sense, he was comparable to a volcano about to erupt, as no one is able to accurately predict a dormant volcano's destructive power. Caught, Yu Jitong's best option for him was to comply with all of Han Li's demands without testing his patiences with riddles or trickery. The last thing he wanted was to anger Han Li and suffer from his rash actions. "I want you to honestly tell me everything concerning what you are and exactly how you came to know Dr. Mo. Right now, the only resource I have in my disposal is time, so I will listen to all you have to say." As he spoke, Han Li seemed to be wearing a mask, his face hiding all emotional fluctuations from Yu Jitong's wary perception. Chapter 58 Immortal Cultivator. Chapter 58, Immortal Cultivator, Kek. Speaking of which, I am also a victim. The moment he opened his mouth to speak, Yu Zhitong tried to get Han Li's sympathy, doing his best to downplay the relationship between him and Dr. Mo, even to the point of breaking all ties. However, his act was in vain. Han Li was not moved at all. Without much of an option, Yu Zhitong had no choice but to continue explaining. Originally, I was an immortal cultivator. Yu Zhitong honestly told Han Li about his history, explaining every details about the circumstances from how he got to know Dr. Mo to how he ended up in his current state. Of course, in his tale, he made himself out to be the victim in the story, pushing all responsibilities and negative connotations onto the head of the dead Dr. Mo. After all, dead men tell no tales. Han Li naturally would not completely believe what he had said. But comparing the story he just heard, alongside with Dr. Mo's words back when he was still alive, Han Li deduced that about 70 to 80% of the story he just heard was true. It was highly improbable but not totally impossible for the circumstances to occur as they had. After removing parts of the story that seemed inconceivable, Han Li already had a rough understanding of the truth. From what Han Li understood regarding his past, Dr. Mo had no reason to lie to him. The stories he heard from Dr. Mo, that he got ambushed and decided to search for ways to regain his original powers and appearance, should be true. There was no need for Dr. Mo to lie to him about that. However, Han Li recalled that Dr. Mo told him earlier that he discovered a mysterious book that outlined a way to regain his vitality. After considering all that transpired, Han Li decided that the story was false, because it does not match with what Yu Zhitong had said. Ultimately, Dr. managed to regain his youth because of Yu Zhitong, yet he was also cursed because of Yu Zhitong. Originally, Yu Zhitong was a member of a cultivation clan. He had managed to cultivate the eternal spring arts to the 7th level. It could be said that he had some expertise, but ultimately because of his limited talent, he made no advancement in the eternal sprint arts and thus was unable to meet the requirements to enter the foundation establishment stage. Cultivators who were not at the foundation establishment stage could not be considered cultivators at all. At most, they could only be considered powerful mortals, halfway to the point of stepping into the realm of immortal cultivators. Because Yu Zhitong was unable to achieve a breakthrough, he decided to explore the secular world for enlightenment, hoping to make a breakthrough in his state of heart, overcoming the bottleneck that forbade him from reaching foundation establishment stage. Of course, he hoped that he would be able to come across rare precious herbs so that he could concoct spiritual pills to aid him in his cultivation. However, he knew that the chance was slim at best. After all, it was only a matter of luck. With high hopes and expectations in his head, the 20-year-old Yu Zhitong arrived at the place cultivators called the secular world. The captivating world out there was full of wondrous events and distractions, causing Yu Zhitong to be dazzled and lost in their splendor. His original state of mind could not be regarded as solidly stable. In less than a few years, it had already degraded. He became nothing more than an influential clan's honored guest and began to enjoy the world's luxurious splendors. As a result, his immortal's heart had gradually weakened. Regarding traitors of the clan, after 100 years, disciples like Yu Zhitong would have their names formally removed from the clan registry. The act of doing so was equivalent to declaring that the traitorous disciples would have no more connections to the clan and would be considered immortal. Chapter 60 Poison Test. Chapter 60 Poison Test. Yu Zhitong was very confident he could sway Han Li since he did not believe that there was anyone who could resist stepping onto the path of cultivators and the temptation of immortality. He thought back to how Dr. Mo hated him but still ended up working with him and even occasionally tried to get on his good side, believing this would make Yu Zhitong more submissive. Much to Yu Zhitong's disappointment, after Han Li heard his enticing promise, he did not reveal even a hint of excitement, his face remaining as impassive and unmoving as ever. As for the matter of cooperation, we can discuss that later. Right now, I still have one question that I hope you would provide me with a clear answer. Han Li said softly as he calmly stared at the ball of light. If I answer this question of yours, then you will be willing to cooperate with me? That depends on your answer and if it is to my satisfaction. Okay, ask away. Yu Zhitong promised immediately and demonstrated his understanding of the concept that one must learn how to yield under pressure. Han Li did not immediately answer, but instead raised his head up to the ceiling in a contemplative manner as if he were thinking deeply about how he should phrase the question. Seeing Han Li's solemn face, Yu Zhitong couldn't help but feel a sense of fear creep up within his heart as he himself wondered what kind of headache-inducing question Han Li would ask him. I want to know if there are any negative side effects from devouring Dr. Mo and a portion of your own soul, because I currently feel a pain in my head, almost as if it's being filled to the point of exploding with information that I am unable to recognize," said Han Li, finally mentioning the one worry he had since he had woken up. After listening this question and realizing that Han Li was worried about such a small problem, Yu Zhitong immediately felt unease in his heart dissipate, and even his voice lightened up. "Hehe. So you were worried about this? Well, little brother, you worry too much. In fact, you don't need to put this matter at heart. If you really want to know, the information you feel stuffed into your brain will slowly disappear within a year or two, so you have absolutely nothing to worry about." "So what you are saying is that the things I swallowed are absolutely useless and that I am completely unable to hold on to them? I don't trust you on this," Han Li said coldly as he glared at the Yu Zhitong with traces of suspicion evident on his face. "Saying that you can't even hold on to a bit of it is not actually true, but what you can hold on to is indeed only a small portion of it," Yu Zhitong quickly added on to his explanation out of fear that Han Li would misunderstand something. "For example, you will be unable to touch the included memories, experiences, and emotions, and even if you did absorb them, there is a high chance that you will instantly become mentally crippled, your personality will develop split versions of itself, your consciousness will collapse, and your brain will ultimately burst, leading to your death. You have to understand that the soul is the most precious thing a person can possess. How can it be so easily combined with other things? It is true that you can absorb someone else's soul and have it temporarily rest in your subconscious, but to make it your own is simply wishful thinking. Otherwise, if a simple body possession can allow you to absorb all of one's memories, experiences, chi techniques, then wouldn't that cause the whole world to fall into chaos? If things were that simple, then who would honestly practice cultivation along with going out and exploring the different realms of this world when they could obtain all this through simply possessing someone else's body? Since Han Li did not specialize in weapons, he did not have an opportunity to bring out this dagger during the struggle with Dr. Mo, but it seemed like the time has come for him to use it. Previously, Han Li had kept this weapon hidden on his body and almost didn't have an opportunity to use it. His face darkened and his original smile disappeared by half the thought of almost not being able to use the dagger that he paid a large amount of money to obtain. He looked at the trembling ball of light with apathy and, without saying word, took a flying step forward as he savagely hacked at the green globe as if he were chopping a block of wood. Chapter 61, Destroying the Spirit. Chapter 61, Destroying the Spirit. Yu Zhitong's soul was stuck in the corner of the room, and just like a fly trapped in a sealed house, it could only randomly smash against the walls. Every time it thought it could escape, the dark liquid would force it back to its corner, causing it to be constantly weakened. Even though his soul grew weaker because of Han Li's repeated attempts at trying to cut him with his dagger, what really made him despair was the mysterious black liquid that was corroding his soul. Since the moment the black liquid touched his soul, Yu Zhitong had felt his life essence trickle away, feeble and powerless. It also tore away at the little magic power he had left, which was even deadlier. This prevented Yu Zhitong from performing magic, causing his casted magic techniques to fail repeatedly. It was as if he were completely restricted. "Why are you trying to kill me? What?" Faced with Han Li's ruthless attacks, the ball of light that was Yu Zhitong released a howl filled with anguish, but Han Li did not care about Yu Zhitong's unwillingness to die. Not long after, Yu Zhitong became quieter as he gradually weakened until he was finally unable to emit a sound or show a hint of movement. Seeing Yu Zhitong's stillness, Han Li did not immediately stop his attack. Instead, he continued to observe the ball of light, which had dimmed until it resembled the weak flame of a candle. After a while, Han Li gave a cold answer. "I would never believe you, a person so despicable that you would easily and willingly swear a poisonous oath that condemned your family and ancestors to a gruesome death under heaven's wrath. If I did work with you, then I would following Dr. Mo to his death." With a chilling glare, he gave Yu Zhitong's flickering soul one last glance before turning around, and without hesitation he swiftly pushed open the heavy door. With the door thrown open, a few sharp rays of sunlight shot inside and landed on the globe of light. Upon contact with the dying soul, the sunlight burned Yu Zhitong's last remaining soul force, causing it to turn into a curl of smoke that promptly disappeared into the air with a pooh. With this, the last of trace of Yu Zhitong was cleanly wiped away from this world by Han Li. To say that Han Li knew that Yu Zhitong feared the light was not exactly true. He first thought of this idea when he recalled how Mo Jiren, upon entering the room, quickly blew out several candles. If he did not remember this event, then he would still be hacking at the globe of light to no avail, causing an immeasurable worry to arise in his heart. Although Han Li had eliminated Yu Zhitong's life essence with ease, He had prepared an extra tube of 7 poison water in advance in case his plan didn't work. Compared to the 5 poison water which Mo Jiren took away from him, this second tube contained extra ingredients that greatly increased its potency. One of the added materials was the flowered mushroom, which was extremely deadly to normal mortals and even more effective against immortal cultivators. The effect of its potency could be seen in how Yu Zhitong was unable to use magic, allowing his soul to be easily destroyed. This was the reason why Han Li splashed some 7 poison water on Yu Zhitong's soul. From his research of a variety of legends, there was a visible trend that ghosts, monsters, demons and the like are afraid of chicken blood, black dog blood and other similar bodily fluids, so in this case Han Li treated Yu Zhitong as a ghost. By guessing randomly and through pure coincidence did Han Li manage to kill Yu Zhitong. If Yu Zhitong knew that his death was based on speculation, he would have died again from vomiting. Written on the few sheets of paper, Mo Jiren's will clearly stated that the poison he used on Han Li was for the worst-case scenario that Mo Jiren would die from failing to possess Han Li. So, in preparation of any unsettled business he might have after his death, he decided to include one final, simple exchange with Han Li in his will, allowing Han Li and the deceased doctor to benefit greatly. Mo Jiren would be able to take care of any unsettled business while Han Li would be able to gain a large amount of wealth and an indescribable amount of benefits. As for whether Yu Zhitong would be the last one alive, Mo Jiren did not give it a second thought. He only briefly mentioned him in his will, saying that Yu Zhitong was weak by nature and afraid of death, and although he was a bit smart, that was the extent of his current capabilities. Mo Jiren also mentioned that even though Yu Zhitong was an immortal cultivator, he would never become anything great, and for this reason he was quickly disregarded as being the last person alive. Once Han Li saw this, he laughed bitterly in his heart at how Mo Jiren did not predict that in the end, he would fall into the trap of the innocent-looking Yu Zhitong. If Han Li had not hit his real eternal spring arts cultivation level, he would most likely have ended up like Mo Jiren, allowing Yu Zhitong to receive all the benefits. Of course, Mo Jiren had also planned to achieve his fantasies of becoming an immortal cultivator by taking over Han Li's body. It seemed like no matter what kind of cultivator one became, one must not underestimate others. In his will, the trade Mo Jiren proposed was very simple. He wrote that in a year or 2 the poison would become effective. To remove this poison, Han Li must make a trip to Mo Jiren's home. Mo Jiren had wives and daughters, along with a decently sized business. He had made arrangements for them before he left, but he feared that if he were absent for an extended period of time, his enemies would have evil intent against his family. For this reason, Han Li must rush to protect his wives and family members before the situation escalated and preferably help them escape from the bloody world that is Jianghu so that they can live a normal life without want. As a way of compensating and removing any of Han Li's suspicions, Mo Jiren's will betrothed one of his daughters to him and gave him a dowry of 1/2 of all his assets along with the Yang jaded treasure. Before Mo Jiren left, he had given the precious jade to his wives for safekeeping and also explicitly told them that it was to be used as part of their daughter's dowry. So even if Han Li did not want to wed his daughter, he would be forced to. Of course, Mo Jiren clearly pointed out that his enemies' clans were very large and influential. They also contained many cultivators. The sheer number of members made it hard for the clans to supervise and control all of their members, and with Han Li's current abilities, he wouldn't be capable of dealing with them head-on. For this reason, he specifically prepared 2 false identities for Han Li and carefully hid them in a secret location unknown to anyone besides Mo Jiren. Furthermore, he even left behind a token belonging to Mo Jiren and a handwritten letter. At the same time, he also left a list of names that clearly stated his trusted aides, those he suspected of plotting against him, and the names of his enemy clans within his letter. He also wrote out several things Han Li must take note of. Finally, to express the sincerity of his will, he even left behind how to control and summon the Iron Slave and the Cloud-Winged Bird. What caught Han Li's attention was how Mo Jiren vaguely pointed out the fact that the Iron Slave was actually a soulless corpse whose soul has already entered the cycle of reincarnation, as if to make him not feel unwell. These words caused Han Li to be at a loss. Did he really seem to be of the overly emotional sort? However, even without mentioning the poison within his body, when Han Li was faced with such great riches, he had felt rather tempted. Han Li had always been sensitive to money and was therefore very interested in Mo Jiren's proposal. As for the betrothal to Mo Jiren's daughter, Han Li felt an odd feeling well up within himself. He was around the age when he would experience his first set of romantic thoughts. Furthermore, he knew from Mo Jiren's original appearance that his daughter could not be anything but beautiful. But the risk he faced was no small matter. If he was not careful, he might end up having to pay with his life. Mo Jiren's enemies are not simple characters. Mo Jiren had carefully constructed a watertight plan to take care of any unsettled business, using the chance to start a new life filled with beautiful women and immense wealth as a collective incentive in order to tie Han Li to Mo Jiren's family, effectively mixing safety and danger together by forcing Han Li to swallow this honey-wrapped poison pill. TL, honey-wrapped poison pill, means a situation that looks appealing but contains many hidden dangers. Chapter 63. True appearance. Han Li paced around the room several times before stopping. Should I accept Dr. Mo's deal right now, or should I wait? I'm absolutely sure there is no cure before making my decision. Han Li was helpless, unable to come to a conclusion. Then he looked outside at the Iron Slave and thought back at the unintelligible chant left behind at the end of Mo Jiren's will. A sense of curiosity rose within his heart as he prepared the steps to control the Iron Slave. Han Li bent down and retrieved from within the pile of items a brass bell small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. The brass bell was delicately crafted with harmonious proportions that made it look pleasing to the eyes. With one glance, he could tell that it was the work of a skilled artisan. The only difference this bell had from an ordinary one was the bell frame, which had faint traces of blood stains, making it particularly eye-catching. Han Li carefully inspected all the features of this so-called soul-guiding bell. From its surface, he was unable to see what was so special about it, but by following Mo Jiren's instructions, he could control the frightening Iron Slave. Such an object was inconceivable. Han Li held onto the small bell with his left hand and a dagger with his right hand. Slowly and cautiously, he walked out past the stone door and approached the Iron Slave. When he was 20 feet away from the large man, he stopped walking, unwilling to move any further. If he moved even 1 foot closer, he might not be able to protect himself from any accidents. At this moment, the Iron Slave was standing straight with his back faced towards Han Li. Dang! A crisp and clear sound rang out from the bell after Han Li used his dagger to softly hit the copper bell. Han Li briefly wrinkled his eyebrows. The sound was the same as that of a normal clock, so how could it possibly control the Iron Slave? His heart wavered slightly. His body shrank down a little as he prepared himself to run back to the stone room at the first signs of failure. Hearing the ringing from the bell, the Iron Slave's shoulders shook almost imperceptibly. Seeing this reaction, Han Li felt delighted, and he quickly continued to strike the bell. Da, da. The bell sounded out in quick succession and the Iron Slave's body shuddered accordingly until even his walking became staggered, unable to stand firmly, causing him to finally fall face down on the ground, unconscious. The Iron Slave's immense body, upon impact with the ground, unsettled a large amount of dust that caused the unprepared Han Li to sneeze consecutively, making him look battered and dirted. But at this time Han Li could care less about his appearance. He quickly pounced on the Iron Slave and reached his hands out to tear away his cloak, revealing a bloated face that shocked and absolutely horrified Han Li. Han Li forcefully endured the uncomfortable feeling within his heart, unwilling to continue to inspect the Iron Slave anymore. Using his dagger to lightly cut open his own wrist, Han Li allowed some of his blood to flow out unobstructed, dripping onto the Iron Slave's face until his face was completely smeared with blood before Han Li found a clean strip of clothing to tie around his wrist in order to prevent further bleeding. Then he calmly stood to the side to watch the Iron Slave's reaction. Then, strangely enough, all the blood on the Iron Slave's face slowly sank into his skin without a single drop left behind, causing Han Li, who was watching off to the side, to be dumbstruck to the point where he was oblivious to the fact that he exerted too much pressure on the wound, causing fresh blood to seep out of underneath the cloth. Once the blood was completely absorbed, the Iron Slave opened both eyes and slowly got up. He looked incapable of speech, both his eyes seemed lifeless, without a trace of emotion. Chapter 64. Crooked Soul. Chapter 64. Crooked Soul. Han Li used his hand to feel the giant man's body temperature while staring into his lifeless and inarticulate pair of eyes. Within his heart, he was trying to guess all the bitter experiences Zhang Tai had experienced. Dr. Mo had most likely colluded with Yu Zhitong to kidnap Zhang Tai, a way of the armored elephant practitioner, giving the false pretense that he left and tricking the numerous eyes and ears within the Seven Mysteries sect. Then they secretly used some kind of magic technique to remove Zhang Tai's soul, causing his body to become as grotesque as it was now. The effects of their technique were similar to that of the backlash from cultivating the way of the armored elephant. Han Li's guess was not very different from what had actually transpired. After administering his test, Dr. Mo suddenly had the idea of combining the way of the armored elephant with Yu Zhitong's corpse refining technique to create a group of subservient and powerful puppets that could sweep across Jianghu. However, he was only able to create this one soldier who Dr. Mo treated as his treasure. He usually kept the Iron Giant hidden somewhere at the bottom of the mountains, and the only time Dr. Mo took the Iron Giant out of hiding was when he returned to the mountain. But Yu Zhitong was not the least bit interested in this dubious reanimated corpse. In fact, he even snorted disdainfully because when he still had his body, he had been capable of using qi to deal with these kinds of reanimated corpses without much difficulty. In addition, this animated corpse was incomparable to the high-ranked reanimated corpses of cultivators. As a result, it was only useful in the mortal world. The only positive side was that the materials were easier to gather, the process of refining was simpler, and anyone with a little bit of internal qi could use this technique. After a while, Han Li removed his hand from the giant man's face and turned his unsettled eyes away from his body. His gaze landed upon the destroyed stone door, his mind still in a daze. In that moment he felt his heart grow cold, not because of Zhang Tai's situation but rather because of his own cold and detached attitude. He originally thought that when he found out about his friend's miserable downfall, he would furiously lift his head up and shout out, "Mo Jiren!" Yu Zhitong with intense hatred. But in actuality, aside from some sadness, his discovery did not stir up any fury, almost as if the one who fell under these circumstances was not his good friend Zhang Tai but rather a stranger who was not related to him in any way. Was it because he knew that the Zhang Tai in front of him was only an empty shell and not the Zhang Tai he once knew? Or was it because his heart had become too cold? Han Li's cold and detached behavior caused fear to manifest in his heart. He realized right then that he had changed too much to the point where he was foreign to himself. Han Li finally awoke from his stupor and looked at the giant man with eyes filled with turmoil, unsure of how to address him. Thinking of what Dr. Mo said about a lost soul and a walking corpse, Han Li gazed through forlorn eyes and softly said, "Brother Zhang, I imagine you have moved on to the next life so you have no need for your body. Please allow your little brother to use it. I will definitely be careful and I hope that you will not blame me for my actions." After saying a few words and finding peace, Han Li faced the giant man and said, "Since you are the body Brother Zhang left behind and don't have an independent soul of your own, I will call you Crooked Soul. I hope you can provide me with a helping hand in the future." Learning to Han Li's words, the giant man stood there stupidly without moving, and aside from looking tame and obedient, there were no hints of reaction. It seemed like he really lacked the consciousness and could only be commanded into action. "I can't believe I am saying these words to body that can't even think for itself, this is so silly." Han Li mockingly he shook his head and lightly strolled inside the stone room. Crooked Soul, keep up. Once Han Li recovered from his downcast state, his expression returned to normal as if he had never been dejected at all. The truth indeed reflected his guess. He had become abnormally cold-hearted and rational, not able to be easily disturbed by his own emotions. Han Li, who was about to step onto the path of cultivation, was unsure of whether this outstanding change would be a source of great calamity or great fortune. For a short time afterwards, Han Li spent a good half-day in order to deal with the aftermath of the situation. He not only had to bury Dr. Mo's corpse under some big tree but also had to destroy and throw away all the items in the stone room. He even ordered Crooked Soul to beat up the stone room, tearing everything in the room beyond recognition. Only when he was unable to tell the room's original appearance was he willing to stop and rest. After this destruction was over, the day had already transitioned into the evening, and the sun was already setting. Han Li stood in front of what used to be the stone room, now a stone heap, seizing everything up once and making sure nothing was overlooked before he was satisfied. "Crooked Soul, let's go. We still have several matters to take care of tomorrow. It's a pity you don't have a conscience and can't open your mouth to talk. Otherwise I would have someone I can discuss with, which would help make things proceed more smoothly." Under the illumination of the setting sun's fiery red glow, Han Li dragged along a slender and tall shadow. While walking, Han Li constantly talked to the giant man whom he referred to as Crooked Soul. At last, he found a companion to whom he could confide in without the fear of being complained against. Crooked Soul's expression was cold and detached, making him similar to that of the leader of a neighborhood gang. After arranging a hiding place for Crooked Soul, Han Li returned to his own dwelling. Once inside his house, he acted like a man who hasn't returned back home in a long time, touching and rubbing the chairs and tables, looking everywhere and talking to himself. "Ah, today was an extremely long day. It seems like this day was longer than the first 10 years of my life." Abandoning all of his worries, he came crashing down on his bed, covered his head with his pillow and began falling asleep. He was very tired. He could not bear the mental and physical exhaustion. But, being able to live is truly wonderful. He couldn't help thinking this, and as he entered into sleep, the corner of his lips lifted up in a slight smile. Chapter 65 Medicinal God Han Li. Chapter 65. Medicinal God Han Li lay reclined on the chair that Dr. Mo often sat on, and in his hand, he held a book that read Eternal Spring Arts Incantation on the leather cover. The contents were indeed from one of the volumes of the Eternal Spring Arts Incantation. He read it with keen interest, engrossed by its contents. Dr. Mo often held this book in his hands, reading it countless times without growing sick of it. This abnormal situation used to puzzle Han Li. But today he found out the reason behind Dr. Mo's strange action, which helped him understand that the doctor had not been looking for some method to maintaining his health, but rather he was trying to hardest to comprehend the Eternal Spring Arts Incantation. Dr. Mo had been unwilling to give up on his own inability to cultivate magic power. Instead of placing his complete faith in Yu Zhitong's promises regarding spiritual roots, Mo Juren had continued to persist in his attempts to understand the Eternal Spring Arts. Han Li discovered this secret volume in a secret compartment along with several other items. The book not only contained the first 6 layers of the chant he had cultivated but also another 2 layers that he has never seen before. This unexpected discovery caused Han Li to feel greatly excited. Once Han Li knew that he was cultivating a legendary technique that could call the wind and summon the rain, his thirst for cultivation grew. After all, who doesn't want to be an immortal deity? When the sun was precisely in the middle of the sky, warm rays shone down through the broad skylight and landed on Han Li, who was reading comfortably, causing him to squint his eyes into thin cracks. Han Li slightly lifted up his head to look at the skylight and felt that it was slightly dazzling. He conveniently used the open book to cover his face and block the shining light of the sun. Once he felt the blackness in front of his eyes, his heart felt more comfortable as he once again silently committed the 7th layer of the chant to memory. He recently discovered that due to his continued use of medicinal assistance, he was about to reach a breakthrough in the Eternal Spring Arts into the 7th layer. The earlier he understood the next few layers, the more beneficial it would be for him when he broke through the bottleneck. More than half-year passed since the day Dr. Mo tried to forcibly seize his body. 2 days after the event, in order to cover up Dr. Mo's death, Han Li personally wrote a letter imitating Dr. Mo's handwriting saying that he wanted to return to his hometown to visit his family. Using Dr. Mo's name, he passed on this letter to one of the sect's senior disciples. Within the letter, he shamelessly used Dr. Mo's tone of voice, claiming that Han Li had succeeded all of Dr. Mo's medicinal expertise and that he could substitute him in seeing and treating patients while Dr. Mo was on his long journey. The fake Dr. Mo was unsure of when he would be back, and so in the letter, he also requested the help of several sect members to temporarily look after his duties until he returned to the 7 Mysteries sect. After handing in the letter, several sect elders clearly did not show any hints of doubt since Dr. Mo often left the mountain for months on end in order to gather herbs. In addition, Dr. Mo had a respected position within the 7 Mysteries sect and was venerated for saving Patriarch Wang's life, so he was free to do as he liked. But several sect elders expressed differing opinions concerning the letter's content about how Han Li has succeeded all of Dr. Mo's medicinal expertise, half believing it while the other half doubted the validity of the letter. Although most of his patients were sect disciples with small cases of fevers, knife wounds, and the like, Dr. Mo's main responsibility was to treat the division heads, elders, and other high-ranking figures. The majority of the other disciples had to find one of the other few doctors on the mountaintop for treatment. Thus, at first, several senior members did not immediately allow Han Li to take up Dr. Mo's responsibilities. They first made Han Li treat some disciples in order to test his abilities. Han Li was not the least bit bothered by other people's doubts regarding his medicinal abilities, and he carried an indifferent attitude for all those he treated. The only reason he proposed to take up Dr. Mo's job was because he fancied the God Hand Valley and its decent medicinal garden. If he could continue to stay within the mountain valley and let everyone in the mountain valley fall under his control, he would be able to freely use his secret jade bottle in the mountain valley to speed up the growth of rare herbs without fear of other people discovering his secret. Also, even though this small mountain valley was currently inhabited by one person, if Dr. Mo did not come back after a period of time, the division heads or elders might take back the valley on a whim. As a result, in order to demonstrate his medicinal prowess, Han Li expended large amounts of energy to treat the throngs of disciples who came to look for aid and secretly used the rare herbs whose growth he increased every day. Thus, his medicinal knowledge coupled with his magnanimous use of rare and precious herbs caused those who came to receive medical treatment to believe his ability to create miracles after eating medicine that immediately cured their ailments. As he predicted, word of his medical ability that was claimed to be able to bring back the dead spread like a loud thunderclap on a clear day, rapidly causing a sensation throughout the whole Seven Mysteries sect. Everyone on the mountain knew that within their ranks existed a young, talented medicinal god. This medicinal god's abilities were so profound that they were unmeasurable. Under his rescue and medical attention, regardless of whether it was external injuries, internal injuries, or any other miscellaneous or deadly injuries, the most he needed 3 days to return a patient to full health. Compared to Dr. Mo's medicinal abilities, Han Li's prowess seemed to soar with great success. In reality, Han Li's medicinal abilities were more lacking than Dr. Mo's, except Dr. Mo would have never squandered so many precious herbs, so he was far surpassed by Han Li when measuring the length of recovery. Han Li once again helped a seriously injured disciple recover back to full health in a few days. Seeing Han Li's feats, the high-ranking figures could not sit any longer. Barely 1 day passed before they sent someone to invite him over. This time, the person who wanted to meet him was unexpectedly someone he had met before. It was the sect leader Ma who Han Li had met at Bone Refining Cliff. Chapter 66 Eccentric Rule. Chapter 66. Eccentric Rule. Sect leader Ma's generous attitude made it clear to Han Li that as long as any conditions he brought up were not excessive, the sect would most likely deliver it. With the sect's help, his anticipated objective could be easily reached. But then again, this kind of generous treatment was not often seen in the entire Seven Mysteries sect. It was obvious that the leaders of the sect were fully aware of the importance a highly talented medicinal god had for cultivators in Jianghu. As a result, Han Li did not hold back and asked that God Hand Valley would be handed over to be his personal residence. He claimed that he did not want outsiders to disturb him in the valley while he researched and studied the art of healing. This condition was not one that was naturally accepted by sect leader Ma. The sect leader probably wanted to rope in Han Li and unexpectedly took the initiative to offer Han Li a young and pretty maid to serve his daily needs. Han Li, suddenly faced with this unexpected bargaining chip, felt his heartbeat quicken, and just as he was about to tacitly agree, he calmed down and thought of all the secrets he was hiding. Feeling a bit distressed, Han Li rejected the offer. Han Li's action caused the sect leader Ma to show considerable admiration and to view him in a new light. He continued to compliment Han Li, saying that at such a young age Han Li was quite handsome and that if sect leader Ma had a daughter, he would marry her to Han Li. Han Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these words because it wasn't that he rejected feminine charm but that he couldn't afford to at this moment. And just like this, the entire God Hand Valley became Han Li's private territory. Outsiders were not allowed to casually enter. Regarding any visitors, Han Li specifically placed a large clock at the entrance of the valley. It didn't matter who wanted to meet Han Li, they just needed to strike the clock, and Han Li would promptly exit the valley to meet them. This eccentric rule was written in bold characters next to the clock. Even a few of the middle to upper rank members could not avoid this rule. The reason why Han Li laid down this eccentric rule was to completely prevent any last possibility of the secret of his bottle from leaking out. As long as no one broke into the mountain valley, Han Li could guarantee the bottle's heaven-defying properties from being known by a second party. At first, this rule was not an issue for the lower-ranked disciples, but it caused many high-ranking members to be very dissatisfied. They believed Han Li viewed himself too highly, not knowing how high the sky was or how deep the earth was. Not even Dr. Mo was this haughty, so how could Han Li, a trifling disciple who just finished his apprenticeship, dare to act so presumptuously? But after Han Li saved someone who suffered a heavy and life-threatening wound from the brink of death and aided in his recovery, all signs of complaint disappeared without a trace, and no one brought up the eccentric rule again. No one wanted to offend someone who may save their lives countless times like the medicinal god over a small and trivial matter. They naturally believed that forcing visitors to ring a bell to meet him was a strange habit unique to temperamental medicinal gods. The following days passed one by one, and even the sect elders gradually followed Han Li's rule. When they wanted to ask for medical help, they would send someone to respectfully sound the big clock to call for Han Li. God Hand Valley's eccentric rule gradually turned Han Li into a legend of sorts in the Seven Mysteries sects. What was ridiculous was that he was not even ranked in the sect. He didn't have a high-ranking position, nor did he hold any position of power. He was still a low-ranking disciple. But then again, who has seen such a popular disciple in the sect? Even the sect elders who came to visit him would address him as Dr. Han. Not many people dared to directly address Han Li by his name. Of course, this did not apply to Li Feiyu, also known to Han Li as senior disciple Li. Li Feiyu still maintained his cold and detached disposition in front of others, but every time he saw Han Li, he became sloppy and carefree. His treatment of Han Li had not been changed by his new identity as a medicinal god, unlike Fatty Wang and the other disciples who had drifted apart and became more respectful. There were no traces of politeness whenever Li Feiyu addressed Han Li by his name. This made Han Li feel a bit of gratitude. He still wasn't accustomed to living a life of solitude. Just thinking about Li Feiyu's expression whenever he laughed, Han Li couldn't help but think of another individual's face. Recently, he unexpectedly met someone else who had ridden the same carriage as Han Li up the mountain several years ago. Now an inner sect member of the 7th Supreme Division, Wu Yan had contracted a strange illness that was untreatable by all of the doctors who were sent to treat him, tormenting him to no ends. In the end, he had no choice but to use sect leader Ma's name to ask for Han Li's help to cure his illness. Wu Yan's memory was quite good, and when he met the famous Dr. Han, he recognized with a single glance that he was one of the children who came on the same carriage as him. Han Li. His face revealed a shocked look that was still fresh in Han Li's memory to this day. That year, Wu Yan's attitude towards Han Li was not exceptionally good, even a bit vile. Seeing Wu Yan's awkward appearance, Han Li truly felt like laughing. Normally, he would not treat Wu Yan's illness because of their shared history, but in order to not damage his reputation as a medicinal god, he even increased the amount of prescribed medicine so that Wu Yan would recover from his illness in 2 short days. During the period of recovery, however, the large amount of prescribed medicine made Wu Yan suffer even more pain. This was Han Li's way of lightly reprimanding the previously vile-tempered youth. Han Li was not as magnanimous as he appeared to be. He wouldn't forget a single grudge. Just like this, Han Li slowly replaced Dr. Mo's position on the mountain and was even considered to be 1 tier above Dr. Mo. In God Hand Valley, Han Li would take out the small bottle, put it inside an empty space within the valley, and allowed the mysterious green liquid to form every 7 to 8 days. With the mysterious green liquid, he would hasten the growth of rare and ancient herbs, which he would refine into medicine with the utmost care. Only a small portion of these herbs were used on those who visited him to seek medical aid. The majority of the herbs were taken and used for Han Li's personal use. He would use them to cultivate and refine Yuan Qi and to push forward in his cultivation of the eternal spring arts. Han Li gently shifted the body within the late Dr. Mo's chair to find a more comfortable position. Although the chair he sat on was indeed Dr. Mo's armchair, this place was not Dr. Mo's house but rather Han Li's residence. He had taken all the items he thought would be useful from Dr. Mo's house and, with no trace of politeness, claimed them as his own, moving them into his own residence. As for the position in which Han Li was sitting, even if someone saw his disrespectful actions, they would not do anything because in their eyes, the current Han Li's worth far exceeded that of Dr. Mo's. People were surprisingly very realistic and practical. Dr. Mo's residence was far bigger than Han Li's, so moving into the bigger house would have been more suitable. Unfortunately, Han Li thought that living there was a bit weird. After all, he was the main cause of Dr. Mo's death. Brazenly living in the house of someone he killed with his own hand would cause his heart to become heavy and cold. As a result, living in his own residence, he calls it his own doghouse, was far more reassuring and comfortable to Han Li. However, whenever he thought of Dr. Mo, Han Li would naturally be unable to forget the sad fact that he was still under the control of a dead person. In the period of time after Dr. Mo's death, he carefully examined his own body, both internally and externally, countless times. He was still unable to refine that thread of cold yin qi hidden within his dantian. Han Li tried to use the pure spirit powder and other famous poison-dispelling methods, but sadly none of them were effective. It seemed like the long journey he would have to take in 1 year's time was unavoidable. Chapter 67 Fireball Technique. Chapter 67 Fireball Technique. Han Li, who had been sitting still for half a day, suddenly raised his left hand and straightened one of his fingers, making him appear unfathomably mysterious. But not long after, the space half an inch away from his erect fingertips suddenly fluctuated, and several small sparks of fire appeared. When the sparks first appeared, they immediately made a zila sound as they twisted and turned in the air to form a walnut-sized ball of red flames. Although this fireball was not big, a blistering heat emanated from this small ball of fire, permeating the entire room. As Han Li reclined, his face was still covered by his book. He appeared to be asleep, if not for the fact that the small fireball at the tip of his finger continued to release zila sounds of high-temperature combustions. This, coupled with his unmoving fingertip, made Han Li appear particularly eye-catching. As minutes inched by, the fireball continued to maintain the same vigorous energy, not revealing any hint of being extinguished. However, Han Li eventually shifted. The finger he used to support the fireball started to tremble slightly. The trembling from his finger grew to affect his wrist, then his entire arm. Soon even his whole body started to tremble. Abruptly, Han Li sat up on the armchair, not even aware that the book had fallen away from his face and onto the ground. His two eyes stared unwaveringly at the fireball on his fingertips, his face red from holding his breath. From his forehead to his neck, his exposed skin revealed many small beads of sweat, appearing as if he had just finished performing some intense exercise that made his body overheat. After a short while, the fireball started to sway alongside Han Li's intense rocking. The floating flame would be large in one moment, then small in the next, unable to maintain a constant state. Not long after, it became small once again. The flame shrank into a spark and dissipated into thin air. Once the fireball disappeared, Han Li felt like a man who had his backbone removed. His fireball had greatly consumed his energy. Extremely drained, he reclined his body once more on the chair. This fireball technique is vexing to train in. Even though I've researched this technique for half a year, I'm still unable to have complete control over it. The most I can manage is extend its duration by a little bit. Talking to himself, Han Li stared at the ceiling. It turned out that the last few pages of the Eternal Spring Arts book contained several magic techniques. At first glance, it was evident that these were beginner-level techniques for cultivators who just entered the sect. Since all he knew was the Eternal Spring Arts incantation, this made Han Li feel like he obtained a treasure, and for several consecutive nights, he was unable to sleep due to his excitement. Since he had witnessed firsthand Dr. Mo using a few of the magic techniques, it was no surprise that he would be this excited. Han Li had found Dr. Mo's strength terrifying, so he viewed the formidable collection of techniques with great interest. Unfortunately for Han Li, who was currently at the peak of the 6th layer of the Eternal Spring Arts incantation, he was like a beggar holding a golden bowl and asking for alms. Since he was never taught any basic magic technique, he was unable to perform even the simplest spell. But now he suddenly came upon several technique incantations. How could he not be pleased? The final pages of the book had 5 techniques and their respective incantations. They were Fireball, Soullock Talisman, Imperial Flight, Telekinesis, and Heaven's Eye. To Han Li, all of the techniques and their incantations were still very ancient, profound, and hard to comprehend. This was no surprise since the incantations were composed of words and phrases from an ancient language. Even though he had read quite a few books, he had a very superficial understanding of the ancient texts, so he was unable to immediately grasp certain meanings. Helpless and without a choice, Han Li finally began studying the Eternal Spring Arts as if his life depending on it, driving straight into piles of different books that were related to old classical languages. He bitterly studied the incantations' meanings every day and night, racking his brain several tens of times over every phrase and every word. Refusing to quit, Han Li was resolved to completely comprehend all of the techniques listed in the book. Even though he had never gone to a school or academy to obtain a formal education, he understood that making a mistake while cultivating boundlessly powerful energy would be more difficult to deal with than an infuriating obsession and might very well take this small life of his. Thinking of his own personal well-being, Han Li was filled with trepidation and fear, not daring to be even a slight bit careless. After 3 months of intensive research, Han Li finally was able to gain a level of mastery over the theory behind the incantations and apply them. As a result, he was finally starting to truly practice these techniques. However, Han Li's insane method of studying delivered a large mental blow to his enthusiasm and stamina. He had originally planned to rely upon his intelligence, which was enhanced by the Eternal Spring Arts, and thought that learning magic techniques shouldn't be difficult, but who knew that he would suddenly oddly become baffled. He obviously knew the theory behind the techniques, but when it came time to applying them into practice, he could never manage to succeed. No matter what he did, he could not do it right. He did not know whether it was because the spells were wrong, he read the incantations incorrectly, or his magic power was not in the right place. Unable to discover the reason why, Han Li felt extremely slow-witted. Han Li did not know what was causing his failures, but if it was a deficiency in magic power, he would eat another 2 spiritual herbs and the problem would be solved. However, this was a problem that he was unable to wrap his head around. Han Li came to the conclusion that his innate talent for performing celestial arts was not as great as he thought it was. It was only after a long period of bitter training that he finally gained a bit of success in the fireball technique and the Heaven's Eyes technique. As for the other 3 magic techniques, he did not succeed. He was unable to even reach their initial layers. With great dismay, he could only concentrate on the fireball technique and Heaven's Eye technique. He placed quite a bit of hope into these 2 celestial arts since they were the only ones he could comprehend. Among these, the fireball technique's power did not disappoint Han Li. In fact, it greatly surpassed Han Li's expectations. If only their relationship had been as harmonious as the one between Ma Rong and his master. In the depths of his heart, Han Li had always held a form of respect towards Dr. Mo. After all, his medicinal knowledge and eternal spring arts had been imparted to him by the deceased doctor. But sadly, things were not meant to be. The heavens dictated that the 2 would be unable to live in the same world, forcing them fight an intensive battle in which Dr. Mo died accidentally by Han Li's own hands. Thinking about his past memories, Han Li couldn't help but sigh. Afterwards, Ma Rong brought him to Elder Li's place. Chapter 69, Li Feiyu and the Young Lady. Chapter 69. Li Feiyu and the Young Lady. Elder Li's residence was not extravagant. Instead, it was merely a small, humble house. Surrounding several houses in close proximity was a 2-meter-high, half-a-meter-thick dirt wall encircling a simple courtyard. Facing the path was an arched, half-moon gateway through which Han Li could see that the courtyard was filled with many visitors. Stepping into the courtyard, Han Li realized that the actual number of people was much higher than what he saw from outside the gate. They gathered in groups of 2s or 3s, discussing Elder Li's state in low voices. Han Li had already heard that Elder Li was a good-natured person in the 7 Mysteries sect. Regardless if one was a lower-ranked disciple or an esteemed colleague, he rarely got angry with anyone, nor did he scramble for power and profit in the sect. As a result, many figures in the sect, both the important and the insignificant, had nothing but compliments for the old man, causing his popularity to be very high. Not that Elder Li was suffering from a poison-induced illness. Everyone with high status in the sect would eventually pay their respects either personally or through a representative. Not a single person failed to do so regardless if their reason for coming was heartfelt or hypocritic. As a result, the courtyard soon became filled by a throng of people. Once Han Li came in, he was recognized by the people in the courtyard. The lowest protectors immediately surrounded him, each striving to be the first to greet him. "How are you, medicinal god Han?" Dr. Han came. A wave of well-wishing rang out and continuously battered his ears. Even if he didn't want to hear the endless noise, he had no choice but to endure. Seeing these faces brimming with enthusiasm, Han Li similarly showed a bright smile that did not lose to the crowd in terms of splendor. However, although he appeared to be extremely courteous, he was actually sick of false pleasantries. Fortunately, those with high status such as the vice sect leaders and consecrated elders, implicitly nodded their heads in Han Li's direction, showing their acknowledgement of his arrival without making a move to approach him. Seeing that they did not make it uncomfortable for Han Li by making him greet them, Han Li had a good impression about these esteemed individuals. Because of Ma Rong's low status, he was unable to anything besides stand to the side with a look of concern. As the protectors tried to get closer to Han Li with their constant stream of pleasantries, Ma Rong's face revealed worry while both of his bands rubbed against each other non-stop. Finally, after Han Li finished greeting the last person, Ma Rong couldn't wait any longer and immediately rushed forward, grabbing Han Li's arm with one hand and charging straight into the house. This rude and impetuous action angered a few people who wished to get on good terms with medicinal god Han, revealing a bit of their displeasure. On the outside, Han Li had a forced smile, but he was actually quite pleased with Ma Rong's decision. This way he could finally get rid of those incessantly annoying people without having to offend anyone. With a sense of urgency, Han Li was pulled into living room by Ma Rong. There were not very many people inside, except a few family members and 2 elders. Sect leader Ma was also there, but what surprised Han Li the most was that Li Feiyu was also inside the room. Han Li was shocked. According to what he knew, there was no relationship between Li Feiyu and Elder Li, so why did he showed here? Just as his stomach was about to burst with questions, Han Li noticed that senior disciple Li was comforting a petite girl with tears flowing down her face. Li Feiyu's highly focused expression was laced with traces of emotion, a look that was very different from the one he usually showed to his fellow disciples. Looking at Li Feiyu's enamored appearance, Han Li suddenly realized what was going on. Startled, he couldn't help but think that it was extremely funny. Han Li promptly and carefully scrutinized the young lady's appearance, wanting to see just what kind of beauty could make Li Feiyu disregard everything for the sake of love. The young lady looked to be around 15 to 16 years of age and was wearing a jasper hairpin. In addition, she wore a lotus green dress, giving the originally sweet and pleasant facial features a naughty and mischievous air. Despite of this, her two eyes were swollen red, making her seem lovely yet pathetic. Her dejected appearance gave people an urge to lovingly bring her into a hugging embrace. Z's. She really is one fair young lady. Han Li exclaimed for several moments in his heart, thinking that Li Feiyu falling under this lady's love snare was pardonable. In his heart, there was still a trace of envy and jealousy, not knowing when he himself would also be able to have an intimate companion. Maybe it was because he realized that Han Li was studying this young lady, but Ma Rong was quick to introduce everyone within the house to Han Li in order for him to establish a sense of familiarity. Sect leader Ma and a white-faced elder Qian whom Han Li had saw before naturally did not need any introductions, and he immediately took the initiative to step forward to check the body. Greetings sect leader Ma, elder Qian. The young Dr. Han has arrived. Sect leader Ma acted as if he were Han Li's close friend, almost as if there was no difference between their status. Dr. Han is Dr. Han. Why do you have to mention the word young? Han Li silently cursed within his heart in disagreement with sect leader Ma's phrase. On the other hand, elder Qian's attitude was cold and detached. He merely nodded his head, acting in complete opposite to sect leader Ma. Han Li was not offended by elder Qian's indifference, since he knew that elder Qian practiced a special cultivation method that required him to sever his feelings and desires, causing him to treat everyone with the same cold and indifferent attitude. In addition to sect leader Ma and elder Qian, there was another tall, sturdy and red-faced elder with whom Han Li wasn't familiar with. This elder's palms were rough and coarse, and all 10 of his short fingers were thick and solid. From this, it was evident from a single glance that this elder trained in a special martial art. This is Elder Zhao, my master's close friend. His previously job was to supervise the treasure-gathering division outside the mountain. He just came back 2 days ago. Ma Rong said while introducing the elder to Han Li. Towards Han Li, Elder Zhao was neither cold nor warm. He made an N sound with his nose, not saying a word, but the doubt in his eyes was evident. He clearly didn't trust the invited medicinal god Han's skills due to his young age. But within his heart, he knew that sect leader Ma was once again trying to instigate a rift in the relationship between Han Li and Elder Zhao. Sect leader Ma had been indirectly attacking his opponents with words ever since he met Han Li, trying to rope this highly skilled medicinal god into his faction, thus expanding his influence. However, Han Li had never even considered joining the Seven Mysteries sect's internal struggle for power. It was not because he was intentionally aloof from political and material pursuits or that he was arrogant, but because ever since he came into contact with Dr. Mo, Yu Zhidong and similar people of high status, his aspirations were a lot higher, especially since he learned 2 different types of spells. He already viewed the Seven Mysteries sect's internal struggle with minimal importance. Although Han Li was not weak, he did not want to offend those of a higher status. It was for this reason that he chose to avoid giving a clear reply, neither accepting nor declining the invitations from the upper echelon. Just like that, it was sect leader Ma's turn to have endless headaches. Even though Han Li's profound medicinal skills made it so that he could act stubbornly, Han Li was dragging out his response for too long of a period, making sect leader Ma extremely frustrated. To this day Han Li had still refused to join his faction, nor had he given a direct answer. But in order to prevent Han Li from entering other factions, sect leader Ma had to do his best to ruin the relationship between Han Li and the other upper echelon members, inciting disharmony. Whether these childish tactics were effective or not, Han Li did not know, but up until today it was the first time that an upper-level faction had annoyed him greatly. Right now, sect leader Ma was doing his best to undermine Han Li's opinion of Elder Zhao, presumably wanting him to have no good memories of this elder. Ma Rong, noticing the start of a C** fight, felt a bit of panic within his heart and hurriedly continued his introductions. This is my master's wife, Li Shi. He began by pointing at a middle-aged woman who had some resemblance to the young lady. This is... The young lady by Li Feiyu's side was introduced last. Her name was Zhang Xiu. Unexpectedly she was Elder Li's niece. When he introduced Li Feiyu, the other intentionally pretended to not recognize Han Li, revealing a cool, unapproachable appearance. This made Ma Rong, who had initiated the introductions himself, feel awkward. He hurriedly whispered an explanation to Han Li, saying, "Protector Li has always been like this. This is his normal temperament and is not specifically directed at you, Dr. Han, so please do not take this personally." Han Li smiled slightly, knowing that Li Feiyu did not want to reveal their relationship in front of so many people. His demeanor means nothing to me. I would not lower myself by begging for attention from other people. Right now, it is better to look at Elder Li's condition than to waste time by arguing. Saving lives is more important. Han Li intentionally made a dismissive comment toward Li Feiyu. Ma Rong, upon hearing this, put his heart at ease and invited everybody into the bedroom of the sick patient. After hearing Han Li's statement, Li Feiyu's lips twitched a bit, appearing nonchalant. When everyone turned their bodies, he suddenly made a funny face towards Han Li's direction, then quickly returned to his normal appearance, making it seem as if nothing had happened. Han Li strongly resisted his urge to smile. Soon after, he closely followed senior disciple Li's footsteps, coming up to the front of Elder Li's bed. Upon seeing the facial features of the person on the bed, the normally bold Han Li couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. Now he finally understood why the other doctors were not willing to prescribe medicine. Right now, the originally benign-faced senior Elder Li remained unconscious, but there were spots of poison, the size of copper coins, extending from his face to his neck region and from his hands to his legs. Each spot of poison appeared to be different from the others because they varied in a plethora of abnormally bright colors. Everyone who saw them became visibly apprehensive. What was even more problematic for Han Li was that Elder Li's lips were greenish-black and his facial features were enshrouded in a layer of dark air. This meant that the poison was in its late stages, thus making the complex task of saving Elder Li's small life more difficult. Chapter 71. Pure Spirit Powder. Han Li locked his eyebrows and remained quiet. He had just finished taking Elder Li's pulse and examining his tongue and pupils. He made a cursory decision that this poison was a blend of different poisons, the same as the aromatic coiling silk he had used before. Han Li didn't have the ability to remove the poison by targeting one type of poison at a time. He could only try to use the pure spirit powder and other unorthodox methods. Thinking about this, Han Li secretly cursed the other doctors who didn't have the courage to remove the poison and pretended to look like they were investigating, thus leaving him with this difficult problem. After a moment, Elder Zhao could not hold back anymore and asked, "You small child, can you save Elder Li or not? Say something." "Elder Zhao, you are too impatient. Can't you see that Dr. Han is trying to think of a solution? Be more patient." Before Han Li answered, sect leader Ma, who was standing nearby, once again pretended to be Han Li's ally and taunted Elder Zhao. Elder Zhao stared and opened his mouth as if to say something, but Han Li didn't wait for him to start talking. He gave a slight cough, halting further conversation. Han Li's cough raised a surprised look from the people inside the house. At this moment, Han Li remembered that he was only slightly over 10 years old, but he, albeit somewhat comically, coughed like an old man. The irony of the situation, however, didn't matter. He had completed his goal and didn't want to listen to the pair's argument anymore. This is a blend of different poison, which makes it very troublesome to remove. I can't promise that I can completely remove this poison, but I can try. The process of removing the poison is risky, and it may even hasten Elder Li's death. Do you still want me to proceed? Han Li pretended to be awkward and finished his statement. For him, it was better to not take the effort to remove the poison, seeing that his chances of succeeding were not very favorable. Han Li's words made the family members look at each other. No one dared to agree and let him immediately start removing the poison, but they knew that other than Han Li, no other doctor would be capable of curing Elder Li. After a while, Elder Li's wife, Lady Li, suddenly asked, "Dr. Han, what is your rate of success for saving my husband?" 50%, Han Li said without hesitating. "Very well. Dr. Han, please do your best to save him. If anything happens to my husband, it will be because of the will of heaven. I will never resent you, Dr. Han." Lady Li showed no hesitation, making up her mind so decisively in a manner that Han Li didn't expect. "Sister, you're not going to reconsider? I think it's incredibly risky considering that this doctor is very young." Elder Zhao grew slightly anxious and wanted to dissuade Lady Li from being overly impulsive. "I've considered it thoroughly. If Dr. Han doesn't remove the poison, my husband will not live past tonight. Why not take the risk and try even if there's only a 50% chance of success?" Lady Li put her head down and said softly, "This?" Elder Zhao could not reply with even a single word. Han Li briefly glanced at the other individuals and seeing how they did not oppose Lady Li's decision, he removed a green porcelain bottle from his medicinal bag. From within the bottle he took out a red medicinal pill. "Someone bring a bowl of warm water, dissolve this pill within the water and have Elder Li drink it." "I'll go." A clear and melodious voice rang out before Han Li finished speaking. Right after answering, the red-eyed Zhang Xiu'er, who had been previously standing to the side, started walking out. Li Feiyu stared distractedly before following her out. This caused Han Li to not help but feel unbridled disdain towards Li Feiyu. A moment later, Zhang Xiu'er walked in with a helpless face, both hands empty. The first reason was that he had just said that the process of counteracting the poison would contain some risks, but the poison ended up easily dispelled. The others might think that he had intentionally tricked them. Wouldn't that be the same as slapping himself on the face? Secondly, if the pure spirit powder was so effective in dispelling poison, how come it couldn't treat the poison within his own body? This made him feel even more anger and concern regarding the poison within his body. Chapter 72. Removing poison. Han Li secretly cursed, but he silently maintained the smile on his face. In order to maintain his image as a medicinal god, he had to act as if he had planned everything in advance. Han Li's calm appearance helped him deceive those who were present, letting them believe that the efficiency of the medicinal pill was within his expectations and making them feel more admiration towards him. Sect leader Ma smiled very cheerfully and light-heartedly, showing a sense of pride as if Han Li was already his subordinate. He was currently the one who was the most likely to gain Han Li's support, and as a result, he laughed as joyously and freely as he did. But not long after, the situation took a drastic change. "Not good." Zhang Xiu'er cried out in fear. "The black air on Uncle's face is resurfacing." These words caused everyone to become startled. A few of them gathered impulsively around Elder Li to take a closer look at him. Elder Zhao was among them. Upon hearing Zhang Xiu'er, Han Li felt his heart pause momentarily, but he did not immediately join the crowd. Instead, he stiffly moved closer to the front of the bed. Lady Li was a meticulous lady with a sharp perception, and she hurriedly called out for two juniors to move away from the bed and make room for medicinal god Han so that he could make a diagnosis. Han Li, seeing that there was a space near the bedside, calmly walked up to carefully investigate the situation. Approximately after the length of time for half a stick of incense to burn, Han Li was positive that the poison had not been completely removed, leaving behind a faint and indistinct black air on Elder Li's face. Having reached the final verdict, Han Li slightly turned his head to glance at Zhang Xiu'er, thinking that this young lady had made a fuss over nothing. Han Li's gaze contains a bit of disapproval that was discovered by Li Feiyu, who had been constantly staring at Zhang Xiu'er. He returned Han Li's glance, unwilling to allow Han Li to offend the goddess of his heart. Han Li was speechless. It seemed that once Li Feiyu fell to the snares of love, he would value his beloved over his friends. Han Li returned his composure and continued to scrutinize Elder Li's condition, refusing to be nagged by a simpleton of a man who had been easily swayed by a woman. Aside from the remaining black air on Elder Li's face, the spots of poison on his body, upon reaching the size of a soybean, maintained their size instead of continuing to grow even smaller. Due to the remaining poison in his body, Elder Li still remained unconscious. Seeing the current situation, Han Li knew that he might finally be able to use his backup plan and not have to worry about the lies he told. It was just the right time to demonstrate his own foresight. "Fetch a basin full of clear water," Han Li said with an unquestionable tone. This time the task did not fall upon Zhang Xiu'er. Ma Rong rushed out before anyone could respond. Han Li turned around and solemnly said to Elder Qian and sect leader Ma, "Next I will need two people to help me, using their inner strength to force the poison within Elder Li's body to move towards a few key acupoints. I will then use an acupuncture needle technique to release the blood and detoxify the poison, forcing the poison out of his body. Will you two be able to handle it?" Sect leader Ma's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he still agreed. Elder Qian, on the other hand, coldly nodded his head and agreed in a straightforward manner. "Why do you have to specifically use those two people? Am I not qualified to help?" Elder Zhao asked unhappily, believing that Han Li had underestimated him. Han Li silently sighed, knowing that he had to clearly explain to this obstinate man. The best-case scenario would be if Lady Li were the only one who could enter, Han Li told Lady Li solemnly. After hearing these news, Lady Li could not possibly have any other thought. She swiftly nodded her head and could not help but express her thanks to Han Li. She soon rushed into the room by herself in order to see her husband with her own eyes. Chapter 73. Li Feiyu's thoughts upon entering the house. Lady Li smelled a strong odor and saw sect leader Ma and Elder Qian sitting cross-legged in front of the bed with their eyes closed and in the process of harmonizing their breathing. In the space between the two people, a basin of black blood emitted a horrid stench according to Han Li. Their faces were a bit pale due to the large amount of energy that they had expended for the sake of treating Elder Li. Lady Li's heart was suddenly filled with gratitude towards the two men. Although she did not know any martial arts from what she had just seen and heard, she knew better than to bother the two people and quickly slowed down her steps, lightly approaching the front of the bed and looking towards the person lying in the bed sheets. She only saw Elder Li sleeping soundly on the bed. The painful look between his brows had completely disappeared, although his face still looked greenish-yellow. The black qi was gone, and the poison spots on the body also disappeared, leaving behind tiny scars that were nearly invisible to the human eye. Seeing that the poison had almost been completely removed, Lady Li couldn't help but cry out in joy. A moment later, she wiped away the tears from the corner of her eyes. She remembered that she should go back and thank Han Li again, and thus she promptly gathered herself and quietly walked back to the living room. Once she stepped out of Elder Li's room, she was immediately surrounded by people who assaulted her with rounds of questions that never ended, so she did not have the chance to see Han Li. She couldn't help but be surprised at the fact that Han Li was absent, so she hurriedly asked Ma Rong and the other people where he had gone. After listening to their reply, Lady Li realized that Han Li had prescribed a rejuvenating drug before leaving, nimbly excusing himself, not staying a moment longer. After hearing this, Lady Li was speechless for quite a while, but within her heart she had already made a firm decision. She decided that once Elder Li's body recovered, the couple, husband and wife, must personally pay a visit to Han Li and give a large sum of money in thanks for saving Elder Li's life. Lady Li did not notice that within the room, aside from medicinal god Han Li, there was another person missing. Li Feiyu had left instead of staying around Zhang Xiu'er like a constant shadow on the side of some obscure small road. Han Li, who had recently left Elder Li's house, was laying on the grass with his hands under his head, relaxing under a lush and dense tree. Just when he had finished counting to 1,000, a black shadow suddenly pounced on his body. He became very aggressive, as if he was deeply annoyed by the disturbance. "Hey, stop messing around. How come every time we meet you always try to jump me? I'm not Zhang Xiu'er." After Han Li finished speaking, the black shadow nimbly turned around in midair, landing on Han Li's side as light as a feather. His posture was elegant to the extreme. It was precisely Li Feiyu who had followed him. "Han Li, wouldn't that dark and swarthy appearance of yours be completely shamed when compared to Lady Zhang Xiu'er?" After hearing his words, Li Feiyu was irritated, and gently lifted his right toe to poke at Han Li's buttocks in a reprimanding manner. Hearing his response, Han Li rolled his eyes and smoothly stood up. "It seems that our senior disciple Li values his beloved over his friends. I truly am not prudent when it comes to making friends." "Stop speaking nonsense. What did you call me out for? You have to know that I finally found a rare opportunity to get close to Zhang Xiu'er, but I'm wasting it by meeting with you. If you can't say something worthwhile, then don't think you'll be able to get away with it." Li Feiyu appeared to be distraught and deeply angered by Han Li because he was randomly called out. "Did I call you out? How come even I did not know of it? Did I personally say it?" Han Li intentionally pretended to be shocked by exaggerating his surprise. "When you came out of the room you winked at me. Only a blind man wouldn't have seen it. Stop beating around the bush. If you have nothing to say, then I truly must return." Li Feiyu turned around if he wanted to leave, preventing Han Li from being able to tell whether or not his attitude was a bluff. Han Li did not plan to continue teasing his friend. His expression suddenly changed as he sternly told Li Feiyu, "Don't blame me for being meddlesome. As your friend, I want to confirm something. Does Zhang Xiu'er know that you are taking the essence extraction pill and that you only have a few years left to live?" Upon hearing these words, Li Feiyu turned silent. His face became deadly pale without a visible hint of blood. Han Li sighed softly, knowing that he did not need to ask any further. The answer was evident in Li Feiyu's expression alone. "Why must you always interfere with my affairs?" Li Feiyu's expression was extremely sorrowful, finally speaking after a long agonizing pause. Han Li did not reply to Li Feiyu's question, Instead, he softly patted the other's shoulder, trying to console him. You must have heard before that if you invest too much in this kind of relationship, your sorrows will only grow. Han Li finally spoke what was on his mind after Li Feiyu had somewhat calmed down. He phrased this with a wise tone, making Li Feiyu pause for a moment. I am trying to pull you out of the trap before you fall too deep so that you will suffer less pain in the future, Han Li warmly said, supplementing his words. Li Feiyu looked at Han Li with a strange look in his eyes. What, do you have a problem? Asked Han Li. He was disturbed by Li Feiyu's gaze and hurriedly looked at him up and down. You little brat, how old are you that you can speak this way? Why do you speak as if you were an old rosy hand when it comes to relationships? Don't tell me that you have already experienced the love of a woman? Li Feiyu suddenly opened his mouth to ask. Of course not, these words come from reading books. I think they are very reasonable, so I use them to explain things to you. Oh, so it's like that, I say. How can a presentable man with an unrestrained and natural appearance like me know less about matters of the heart? Do I need your lengthy criticism? Our relationship exists only in my mind. Li Feiyu released a lengthy sigh, continuously patting his own chest as if he had received a big scare. Han Li was speechless. Wasn't this fool's recovery way too quick? He was just talking about living and dying, and in the blink of an eye, he was once again laughing like an idiot, still an emotional person. But Han Li was stubborn as a mule and asked, Are you really giving up on Zhang Xiu'er? You won't take action when you see her in another's embrace? Li Feiyu's giddy appearance immediately turned extremely cold. Filled with killing intent, he declared, I will chop off the hand of anyone who dares to touch Zhang Xiu'er. I don't care about the things that happen after I die, but as long as I'm alive, Lady Zhang Xiu'er belongs to me. The tone of his words could turn anyone into solid ice. Chapter 74 Imperial Flight Technique. Chapter 74. Imperial Flight Technique. Han Li looked at Li Feiyu's domineering face with respect and remained silent, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, Li Feiyu's imposing air was abruptly retracted, returning him back to his jovial self. He suddenly winked his eye at Han Li and loudly said, What do you think? Wasn't my imposing air realistic? Wasn't it overflowing with such an air of dominance, a formidable quality, that it made you admire me to the point of prostrating yourself in admiration, immediately resolving your heart to vow your loyalty and devotion to me? Hearing these arrogant words, Han Li couldn't help but laugh bitterly because he was actually moved by the Li Feiyu's resolute words. However, Li Feiyu's last words immediately reverted him to his true colors. Han Li harshly stared at him for a short moment and gnashed his teeth together before saying, Formidable character? I see you're more like a coward. Li Feiyu did not mind this harsh criticism. Instead, he started laughing loudly in a very carefree manner, apparently very happy that he could manipulate Han Li in this way. However, Han Li slowly recovered his composure, and while Li Feiyu was still laughing, he indifferently said, I have already reminded about your predicament, which you clearly understood. Now I will solemnly ask you once again. Would you be willing to dispel your martial arts? If you do, I might still be able to prolong your life for a few more years, enabling you to live with Zhang Xiu'er for a longer period of time. Will you truly not consider this option? Li Feiyu's laughter suddenly choked to a stop. His face deepened and his eyes fiercely pierced into Han Li, who closed his mouth. But Han Li's expression remained the same and did not falter in returning his gaze. After the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, Li Feiyu retracted the penetrative gaze from his eyes. His complexion returned to a much better state. Han Li, I have already told you that I will definitely not consider voluntarily discarding my martial arts. I know that you are looking out for me, but don't mention this again, all right? He said with an unyielding attitude, his words containing a beseeching tone. Moreover, do you think that Zhang Xiu'er will be able to look up to me if I became a mediocre person without the strength to even win against a chicken? Li Feiyu asked with a mocking tone. Han Li was speechless. He turned his head to one side, and his eyes followed the small road that Li Feiyu had come from. After calmly looking around for a moment, he opened his mouth to say, Since you have already made your decision, then I will no longer try to persuade you otherwise. Hurry up, you should leave right now. Hopefully you and Lady Zhang Xiu'er can become a happy couple. At Han Li's words, Li Feiyu's face was immediately covered in a smile. He strongly patted Han Li's shoulder several times. Good brother, these are the kinds of words that I love to hear. As of today, they are also the words that make me the happiest. I will be leaving first. With a few leaps, he disappeared down a small road, his silhouette vanishing without a trace. "Oh, how it aches." Han Li quickly grabbed at his shoulder. Li Feiyu's multiple slaps had secretly contained inner strength, making his shoulder immediately swell until it looked like a small red bun. This time his suffering was not small. "This fool actually used inner strength to retaliate just because I poked at his sore spot," Han Li thought, grimacing in pain while fishing out a medicinal paste. He took off his upper garment to spread the paste across his shoulder to heal his injury. Sigh. "It is with great difficulty that I finally do a good deed, but this is how I end up. I really am not suited to doing good deeds. I should probably get back to comprehending my magic techniques. The next time I see him, I'll get my revenge for this incident," Han Li thought with a hint of annoyance. After a long stretch of time had passed, Han Li turned 18 years old. In this period of time, the Seven Mysteries sect and the Feral Wolf gang had continued fighting until they finally declared war on each other. Since then, several small skirmishes and big clashes had broken out at the border between the two powerhouses. All of the disciples, including Han Li, were affected by these battles, making Han Li feel endless sorrow and grief. The large clock outside the valley rang out more frequently than usual as a result of the increased number of injuries, giving Han Li the opportunity to practice quite a few difficult medicinal techniques, causing him to have great progress in his medicinal expertise. But even with Han Li's magical hands that seemed able to bring the dead back to life, there were still quite a few high-ranking sect members who had succumbed to their injuries. They either died in the battlefield or on the way back from the front lines, not even giving Han Li the slightest opportunity to save their lives. It was also because of this that both sides revealed their young prodigies, who assumed the positions of their fallen comrades. These talented youths included Wuxia Sanying Erbao from the Feral Wolf gang and Jie Shuangxiong from the Seven Mysteries sect. Li Feiyu was also included among these talented youths because he had personally beheaded Ziyi Zhang, thus obtaining the revered position of division head of the External Blade Division. Li Feiyu could already be considered as a person of high authority. His relationship with Zhang Xiu'er was also progressing rapidly, already to the point where marriage discussions were held. Aware of the upcoming marriage, Han Li could only sigh. Who could know whether what Li Feiyu was doing was right? After all, he was not Li Feiyu, nor had Han Li walked in his shoes. Thus, Han Li was incapable of making a decision regarding Li Feiyu's course of actions, but thinking back, Han Li would not have had the courage to seek for his loved one's hand in marriage while knowing that his death was imminent. As a result, Han Li could only pretend to be deaf and mute. He was aware that no matter how close he was to Li Feiyu, there were some lines he could not cross. Li Feiyu was his good friend, so of course Han Li had to be considerate of his choices. Additionally, an extremely important matter recently occurred, forcing him to divert a large portion of his attention. Through countless failures, Han Li finally learned how to use the Imperial Flight Technique. The Imperial Flight Technique was similar to Heaven's Eye Technique. Both of them were supplementary techniques and could only be performed on one's own body instead of on others. However, its practical use was better than Heaven's Eye Technique by a substantial amount. After using Imperial Flight Technique, Han Li felt his body become as light as a swallow. Just by lightly tapping his toe on the ground, he was able to flash by several tens of feet without expending the slightest effort. In addition, the high-speed sensation of rushing through the air was so addicting that Han Li would wildly run around the valley 5 or 6 times on a daily basis. Aside from his small addiction, he became an expert of Qinggong. Qinggong is a Chinese martial arts technique that involves running up a plank supported against a wall. In wuxia, the practitioner is eventually able to walk over water and travel as light as a feather, etc. For more information, here is a Wikipedia link. https://en. Wikipedia.org/wiki/Qinggong. Of course, this acceleration was different from acceleration achieved by using the technique shifting smoke steps. Shifting smoke steps was the sect's secret technique that made the impossible possible by using a copious amount of power to increase speed within a short distance. This kind of movement technique could only reveal its greatest potential in narrow spaces. In contrast, Imperial Flight Technique gradually used magic power in small amounts throughout its execution, minimizing the burden on the body. Han Li was capable of running wildly at will without developing any of the symptoms that were normally exhibited when the body was undergoing extreme stress. Moreover, this technique would continue until he ran out of magic power or until he willingly stopped supplying magic power. As a result, Imperial Flight Technique was an essential technique commonly used by low-level cultivators while traveling across the land. Chapter 75 Using Magic Techniques. Chapter 75. Using magic technique. Since mastering the Imperial Flight Technique, Hanli had become even more intrigued by the potential of the other two magic techniques, Soul Lock Talisman and Telekinesis Technique. So he spent large amounts of time and energy, hoping that one day he could make a sudden breakthrough like he did with the Imperial Flight Technique and gain a flash of insight. But after spending some time on valuable research, Hanli discovered that he was unable to use these two techniques. It wasn't because of an inherent defect in Hanli's constitution, but rather because his body wasn't strong enough for either technique. As described in the book, the Soul Lock Talisman was a type of charm that one had to prepare beforehand. Hanli used yellow paper that he bought from a nearby small town and followed the book's instructions, drawing the pattern with a writing brush. Even though the book did not describe what materials should be used to create the talisman, he kept thinking back to Dr. Mo's silver-colored talisman. He naturally adopted the use of this precious and luxurious silver powder. Whether this material was effective or not, Hanli did not know, but his homemade talisman soon looked exactly like the illustrations found in the book. What a shame. Even though the talisman's appearance was identical, it was still not enough. Whenever Hanli performed the activation incantation, the writing on the magical talisman would not emit a dazzling silvery light that had appeared back when Dr. Mo used the Soul Lock Talisman. Nothing strange or out of the ordinary occurred either. It was an utter failure, causing him to fall into a predicament with no room for improving it. He didn't know whether his failure was due to an error in chanting the incantation, his inability to grasp how to do it, or a mistake in creating the talisman. But after a more recent investigation, a different result was revealed. After an intensive series of studies about materials, folklore, and magic techniques, Hanli finally discovered that the talismans used by cultivators were not objects that ordinary mortals would recognize. They were not made of ordinary papers and materials, but rather materials that only cultivators would know how to process into talismans. These materials could only be found in special areas accessible only to cultivators. Because of this, even though he had performed the incantation gesture perfectly, he never succeeded. Telekinesis technique also followed the same logic. Hanli used to believe that he could cast the telekinesis technique on whatever item he casually picked. He practiced on common household items such as knives, blades, etc., but failed in every attempt. But now that Hanli was more informed, he finally understood that the telekinesis technique could only control objects that had been specially crafted for cultivators. It would not work on ordinary items. As a result, Hanli took the weird and bizarre items he gained from Dr. Mo, including the soul-luring clock and the 7 silver knives used in the 7 soul-devouring technique, and used them as a medium for the telekinesis technique. After some experimenting, however, not a single item could be used to perform the technique. This made Hanli be extremely disappointed. None of these items could be used with the telekinesis technique. He had no choice but to stop until he found a suitable object. TL, the soul-luring watch is the watch that Hanli and Dr. Mo used to control Crooked Soul. Since he knew that his problem was a lack of suitable objects for the Soul Lock Talisman and the telekinesis technique, Hanli could only shift his attention elsewhere. He intended to take the other secret martial arts skills and magic techniques in order to combine them and increase his own strength, raising him to new levels in a relatively short period of time. He was not arrogant enough to believe that learning 1 or 2 basic magic techniques would allow him to compete and stand on even ground with other cultivators. His current enemies were still the mortals of the secular world, not the cultivators of Jianghu. As a result, Hanli was not arrogant. Instead, he was merely enjoying his own success. Just as he was preparing to find an excuse to leave the 7 Mysteries sect, the Feral Wolf gang suddenly suggested holding peace talks. When the news spread, it caused the 7 Mysteries sect to be in an uproar. In recent battles, it had been the Feral Wolf gang who had the upper hand, constantly pressuring the 7 Mysteries sect. Under such circumstances, why would the Feral Wolf gang want to engage in peace talks? Was it possible that there was a hidden trick? This raised suspicions within several people. In a short period of time, calls for accepting and rejecting the peace talks rang out in succession within the 7 Mysteries sect. All of the elite members had their own views. Li Feiyu was among those who stubbornly refused. Those who opposed the peace talks and those who supported the talks voiced their opinions in equal clamors. Neither side could come out from the argument as a clear winner. In the end, sect leader Wang had to put his foot down and make a decision. He declared that the 7 Mysteries sect would hold the peace talks, and if the conditions weren't too ridiculous, then the 2 powerhouses would shake hands. If the conditions were too extravagant, they would continue fighting. Even though this kind of filthy decision was unable to satisfy either party, it was the only compromise available. The Seven Mysteries sect was forced to proceed in this manner. TL, the original Chinese said, mixed in mud. Chapter 76 Negotiations and Eruptions. Chapter 76. Negotiations and Eruptions. After several discussions between the Seven Mysteries sect and the Feral Wolf gang, the two agreed to meet and discuss at a place called Falling Sand Slope, located between their two borders. As for the members of the delegate teams who will participate in the discussions, the Feral Wolf gang adamantly proposed that both sides must have one figure of high authority as an expression of good faith. Otherwise, there was no need to hold this discussion. When this condition was brought forth, it did not cause an uproar within the Seven Mysteries sect, since this was a very normal condition for negotiations. Of course, neither side was willing to send their highest-ranking elite to such a dangerous situation. The Seven Mysteries sect would at most send out an auxiliary sect leader, while the Feral Wolf gang would send out an auxiliary member of a similar status to maintain their reputation. Hence, this condition was not a problem. As a result, both sides agreed on a set date for the negotiations, and when that day came around, both groups sent out 100 or so members to join the meeting. In order to prepare for any possible ambush the Feral Wolf gang may set during the negotiations, the members of the Seven Mysteries sect participating in the negotiations had made a meticulous backup plan. In addition to the delegate team, which consisted of 5 members, the remaining 100 sect members formed a large squadron led by Vice Sect Leader Wu, the sect's second strongest member. The 100 sect members were all high-level experts within the sect. These members were all known protectors and were worshipped as core sect members. Among them included several elders, division heads, high-ranked members and the like. A squadron formed by such esteemed members was truly worth of being considered a grand battle formation, with so many experts forming the procession. Even if the Feral Wolf gang's entire elite troops attacked at once, they would probably not be able to block the sect's advance. Each member of the Seven Mysteries sect, from the highest to the lowest member, felt great deal of confidence. For this reason, if there was anything that hinted foul play, the negotiators could depend on these highly skilled martial artists to quickly kill their way out of the entrapment and return to their own territory, where there would be countless numbers of sect brothers responsible for receiving them, assuring them a safe retreat. Li Feiyu also volunteered to join. For him, who did not have much time to live, the more dangerous the place, the more his thirst to would grow. Once the negotiation date approached, the procession that took up nearly half of the Seven Mysteries sect's top experts set out on their journey. To them, this journey would take at least half a month's time and would be slow and arduous. Han Li did not hold this matter with much importance. Whether or not the negotiations succeeded did not matter to him. He was getting ready to leave this place for the outside world to temper himself, so what did the rise and fall of the Seven Mysteries sect have to do with him? As long as they did not involve him, he too lazy to care about the matter. So during the days before the squadron would leave for the negotiation, he remained calm and leisurely about accelerating the growth of the medicinal herbs he might require in the future. Moreover, he started to collect a few precious seeds of herbs in preparation for future uses. Han Li already decided that once the delegate team returned to the mountain, he would officially say his farewells to a few members of the sect. If the sect's elite members were unwilling to let him leave, he did not mind revealing a bit of his true power in front of them for them to witness his might and completely give up on holding him back. In reality, secretly leaving would be the most convenient option, but Han Li was worried that when they couldn't find him, they would cause trouble for his family. He decided that conspicuously bidding the sect's elite members farewell while revealing a bit of his power to intimidate them was necessary. As for his excuse for leaving, Han Li had already spent a long time thinking it through. All he needed to say was that he missed Dr. Mo and wanted to search for his master. As for whether the other believed him or not, Han Li did not care at all. With his power supporting him, how could he be worried about what they thought? Whenever Han Li thought of this, he couldn't help but lift the corner of his mouth and reveal a hint of a cold smile. The current Han Li could extinguish the lives of a few sect members if he wanted, and it would be as easy as turning a palm. Of course, these was all just thoughts. He would not do anything drastic like killing sect members. But Han Li would have never imagined that 4 nights after the negotiating team left, a shabbily dressed person with long and unruly hair and covered from head to toe in dust would suddenly barge into his house. His eyes completely bloodshot and with white lips, he hoarsely said to him a single breath, "The negotiation team is finished. Sect Master Wu, the protectors, the consecrated elders, they're all dead." Han Li was dumbstruck upon hearing this, but before he even opened his mouth to ask, "Do?" Suddenly from somewhere in the mountain range, a sharp and penetrating sentry warning rang through the air. Bang bang, it was followed by another wave of muffled sentry warnings. Dong dong, ding ding, ping ping, all sorts of warning sounds rang out in the same manner, followed closely by countless cries of battle rising and falling in succession throughout the mountain. Among the noise was the faint sounds of weapons clashing against each other. In that one moment, the entire mountain area, which had been covered with serene clouds tinged with sunset hues, became a giant battleground where members were massacred. Han Li's face changed. He was unable to continue listening to the man talking in front of him, and with a flash of his body, Han Li appeared outside of his residence. He quickly looked in all four directions, found the highest building, and slightly stamped his foot, his body appearing on top of the building. He then looked into the distance outside of the valley. His visage became very unsightly and gloomy. Not far within his vision, the mountain seemed to be filled with flames that reached the skies, people rushing around, and sword flashes gleaming non-stop. Moreover, there were sounds of close combat everywhere. The warning sounds that rang out merged with angry shouts in a frenzied mass of noise. Hearing the wind moving behind his back, he asked without turning his head, "Li Feiyu, is it the Feral Wolf gang?" "Yes." Who would have thought that they had planned so meticulously? After practically annihilating the negotiation team, they immediately moved up the mountain to slaughter the remaining survivors. The dusty informant with long and unruly hair was precisely Li Feiyu, who had left 4 days prior. His current voice was dripping with pent-up rage, unwilling to accept the Feral Wolf gang's actions. Chapter 77 Countermeasure. Chapter 77 Countermeasure. But what is strange is how they broke through the sentry outposts surrounding mountains. When we retreated back up the mountain, we clearly called out to the sentries to be on high alert, Li Feiyu said to himself, full of doubt. There is nothing strange about this. The Feral Wolf gang already made plans for this massive assault a long time ago. Secretly inserting spies within the sentries is an easy matter. It would be normal for the undiscovered spies to silently take over the sentry posts, Han Li lightly said. But if the Feral Wolf gang wanted to easily take over the different divisions, that would be impossible. I reckon that they plan to surround all the division halls on the mountain but not attack them. Then they will gather all their experts to concentrate their attacks on the main division located at Setting Sun Summit. They only need to capture or kill the sect leader, and the rest will follow suit. So what should we do now? Should we go to Setting Sun Summit? Li Feiyu's questions impatiently followed one another. Han Li was speechless. After quite some time, he suddenly turned his body towards Li Feiyu and gravely said, "You still haven't told me something crucial. The negotiation team had so many highly skilled experts, so how could they be completely wiped out? Logically speaking, the Feral Wolf gang shouldn't have that much strength." Upon hearing these words, Li Feiyu's facial muscles tensed for a moment, and he couldn't help but stick out his tongue to lick his cracked lips. Revealing a hint of a bitter smiling expression, he said, "They fired large quantities of crossbows in rapid succession. These crossbows happened to be military grade." Military grade rapid-fire crossbows? That's correct. It was our second day since we left the mountain. We were walking in a field, and since we were still in our own territory, everyone was pretty relaxed. In that moment, countless Feral Wolf gang members appeared from all sides, and in each of their hand was a stiff crossbow. Soon the sky was covered by a rain of crossbow bolts. The sneak attack caused those disciples with lacking martial arts skills to die on the spot amidst the chaotic rain of bolts. Only a few martial art experts or the extremely lucky ones were able to dodge this first wave, but many carried injuries which weakened their martial arts skill by quite a bit. I am also one of those who were lucky, otherwise I would not have made it back. Speaking up to this point, Li Feiyu still had some lingering fears, his eyes unconsciously revealing traces of dread. It seems like the image of a volley of crossbow bolts provoked quite a big reaction from Li Feiyu. After the volley of arrows, the others' experts appeared, and everyone took part in a bitter battle. The remainder of our forces decided break apart our formation, going in separate ways in order to increase our chances of survival. My luck was also good. In the enemy's eyes, I was not high on their kill list, so only a few people followed me, and their martial arts skills were not very profound, allowing me to slaughter my way out. But as I was rushing back, I discovered that the Feral Wolf gang had overrun our checkpoints one by one in quick succession. They were waiting for those who escaped the ambush to walk into their trap. After falling for the trap 2 times, I no longer dared to go seek help. Because I wanted to know about the situation of other sect members, I later steeled my resolve and straightforwardly ambushed a feral wolf gang law enforcer wearing blue clothes. From him, I found out that sect leader Wu and several other elders have all died in battle at the hands of the countless experts that surrounded them, leaving only those who fled like me, who was not considered neither too important nor too weak. He minded his own business and proceeded to enter his own house, starting to swiftly collect all sorts of different yet essential items. Li Feiyu knew that his good friend had never once shown the inclination to care about their sex matters, so he couldn't be bothered to continue asking Han Li how he was able to notice the sound of the footsteps that far away. Instead, he opted to use the time to explain the situation and what their identities were to Han Li, intending to warn Han Li not to be careless. The moment Han Li heard Li Feiyu speak, he instantly understood what Li Feiyu was trying to convey. He lightly smiled and said nothing. From the look on his face, it appeared that Han Li was extremely unconcerned. Li Feiyu was growing increasingly more anxious. Based on my current strength, there's no way to clash directly in a one-on-one fight with that blue-robed enforcer, not to mention their elites surrounding him. I know that you would usually have a lot of cunning plans, so quickly list whatever ideas you have. If not, it will soon be too late to take action. Li Feiyu's sentence was enunciated extremely quickly because the group of people had already entered into the forest and started to walk towards them. If not, let us temporarily hide first, evading the vanguard of our enemies. Li Feiyu suggested a seemingly excellent idea, but what was lamentable to Li Feiyu was that Han Li had no intention to heed his advice. Crooked soul, other than that blue-robed enforcer, I want you to annihilate everyone in that forest. Han Li turned his head, looking at the giant man as he commanded in a cold tone. What? Li Feiyu was thunderstruck after he heard the words that Han Li had uttered. But even before he recovered, that huge giant behind Han Li moved with the speed of a hurricane, rapidly dashing away in the pitch-dark forest. Almost immediately, the voices of the feral wolf gang members cried out. Ayaya! Ah! Who is it? *T, there's an ambush. What is this monster? Arg, run quickly. Arg. Mournful cries of shock rang out in the forest, turning into a cacophony of miserable shrieks before they slowly faded away. Before long there was only silence. Li Feiyu blankly stared in the direction of the forest with a face full of disbelief. Chapter 79 Questioning. Chapter 79. Questioning. Similar to grabbing hold of a little chick, the huge giant carried the blue-robed man with a single hand and rapidly walked out of the forest. Its body, covered with blood stains coupled with the sight of its green robes, was similar to the brilliance of a blossoming peach flower. Li Feiyu sucked in a breath of cold air. As the huge giant walked in front of the two, it tossed the blue-robed man onto the ground. Shortly after, Li Feiyu could smell an acrid smell of blood wafting towards him. Li Feiyu's expression underwent a tremendous change as he unconsciously stepped backwards, making a warding gesture with his hands. The huge giant did not concern itself with Li Feiyu's actions. Instead, it strode forward and stood behind Han Li, becoming silent and motionless as if it had never left that spot. Only then did Li Feiyu let out a breath of air. He suddenly let out a laugh as he looked at the blue-robed man on the ground while surreptitiously stealing glances at the calm Han Li. I say, how can you still be so calm and collected? So the reason was because of the expert behind your back. Why didn't you tell me earlier? You caused me to panic this whole time. Although appearing very relaxed on the surface, Li Feiyu's heart was wildly trembling as he started to guess at the relationship between the green-robed giant and Han Li. Han Li could tell what Li Feiyu was thinking, but he had no intention to explain anything to him. An enigmatic smile broke out on Han Li's visage as he calmly said, This blue-robed enforcer should know plenty of information. Who among us is going to interrogate him? I feel that you, Division Head Deputy Li, should have more experience in this than me. Shall I leave him to you? Noting how Han Li dodged the question, he knew that Han Li had no intention of introducing the huge giant to him. As such, he couldn't help but feel worried in his heart. However, regarding the interrogation of the enforcer, he was extremely interested. After he heard Han Li's suggestion, he swiftly accepted the proposition like a boat flowing along with the current. Li Feiyu lifted the blue-robed man, lightly dashed into the forest, and started his interrogation while Han Li leisurely sat down on a nearby grass patch. After a while, Li Feiyu came out of the forest with a gloomy look on his face. Why are you so fast? Is there any news that we could use? Han Li didn't stand up. He merely twitched his brows as he asked. That craven coward, I haven't even done anything to him, and he already told me everything. As for news, there are two pieces of information. One good and one bad. Which one do you want to hear about first? Li Feiyu replied in a depressed manner. Give me the good news first. At least we would be happier after hearing it, Han Li indifferently said. The good news is that your guess regarding the feral wolf gang's plan was right. The auxiliary forces have no intention of initiating the attack, instead want to surround the valley by taking possession of the other mountain peaks. Meanwhile, their main force is mobilizing towards the setting sun summit to launch an aggressive attack. He said that they have already gained control of many important outposts. Li Feiyu sounded calm, as though he did not care about the safety of those with high level of authority. If that was the good news, there's no need to ask. The bad news must be truly terrible. Han Li rubbed his nose as he said this with confidence. Crowmouth, you are spot on. The bad news is that several small sects, such as the Metal Spear Association and the Broken Water Sect, have joined the Feral Wolf Gang's attack against the Celestial Rainbow Mountains. It seems like our Seven Mysteries sect is going to face an imminent catastrophe. TL, Crowmouth, a person who always says pessimistic things, Han Li froze in shock after hearing the news. This was outside of his expectations. We shouldn't care about the number of attackers. It would be best to meet up your young beloved and underlings and leave here under the cover provided by the chaotic battle. Han Li was quite collected as he made a rational suggestion. Li Feiyu quickly indicated his consent, as this plan suited his needs. And that fellow, how did you handle him? Han Li suddenly asked. I killed him. Are you saying that we should have brought him along? Li Feiyu coldly replied. After hearing this, Han Li let out a small smile as he put one hand on the ground and sprung up from his sitting position. Let's go. We should try to avoid any enemies. If we are unable to do so, kill all those who discover us. There is no need to show mercy. Han Li had spoken lightly, but his words contained boundless killing intent and bloodlust. A few li away from God Hand Valley, Elder Li's courtyard was currently swamped with people. There were males and females, all young and old. They appeared to know not the slightest bit of martial arts and were discussing something in low voices with frightened expressions on their faces. Two black-robed figures, equipped with swords and sabers, were nearby the courtyard, guarding vigilantly. Compared to the people inside the courtyard, they were extremely eye-catching. In the living room of one of the residences, two people were in the middle of a discussion. I object to sending people outside. Our defensive position here is not that strong. If I still send people out, wouldn't our position weaken further? No, absolutely not. A middle-aged fatty with a huge pot belly sprayed saliva all over the place as he shook his head rapidly, objecting with determination. But we have no idea what's going on out there. If we don't send people to scout, wouldn't that be akin to blinding ourselves? This is too passive. The person who was arguing against the fatty was none other than Ma Rong, Elder Li's cherished disciple. Passive? So be it. The things that happen out there have nothing to do with me, and to me, safety is most important. This is the best place to be in this situation. Don't tell me you are going to defy my orders? The fatty blinked his small eyes and suddenly took out a golden yellow tablet from his robes, shaking the command medallion in front of Ma Rong as a look of insufferable arrogance appeared on his face. Ma Rong glanced at the fatty before looking at the command medallion. Sighing, he cupped his hands and replied, "The little me does not dare. I shall follow your esteemed orders." Chapter 80 Encountering the Enemy. Chapter 80. Encountering the enemy. This command medallion was equivalent to having sect leader Wang's personal authority. To possess the medallion enabled one to command all the disciples with a rank lower than an elder. This fatty happened to be sect leader Wang's trusted aide, who was rumored to be sect leader Wang's close cousin. Therefore, any orders or messages that sect leader Wang had would be communicated through this man. Not long ago, sect leader Wang had granted this command medallion in a hurry, relying on the fatty to ask Elder Li, who was up on the mountaintop, to discuss certain matters. However, after this fatty finished relaying orders, he felt that immediately hurrying back after sunset would be too exhausting. By taking advantage of the dutiful trust bestowed on him, he stayed at Elder Li's mansion to take a moment of rest before returning down the mountain. Elder Li helplessly accommodated him because he did not dare to offend him. He arranged for Zhang Xiuer and several other disciples to take him down the mountain as soon the sun set. After a short amount of time, however, Momentous changes occurred on the mountaintop due to the feral wolf gang's assault. This fatty's cowardice was incomparable, so naturally he was unwilling to return alone. However, the people in the courtyard were the many family members of the disciples belonging to the Seven Mysteries sect. Most of them did not know any martial arts, and because of their inability, they lost their heads from fear once the sound of chaos reached them. What could they possibly do? Fortunately, Ma Rong was quite decisive. He promptly requested help from the 20 disciples that Li Feiyu left under his control and gathered all of them together. Since they were all rounded up, they were prevented from running amok in the night and encountering any mishaps. Because this place was quite remote and built on the mountain pass, these people would not understand anything that was going on. Even if they had heard the alarm and the loud battle cries, in the end, all the noise belonged to affairs that happened outside, they wouldn't understand what was happening. Thus, after Ma Rong had quickly finished analyzing the situation, he planned to dispatch a few people to go outside and ask around for news. At this time, the fatty, who was incapable of even the slightest ability in martial arts, acted under false pretenses. Not only did he prevent them from scouting for information, he also relied on the command medallion to snatch away Ma Rong's authority over these outer sect junior disciples. After that, he planned to secure the location and bury his head in the sand. Ma Rong knew the importance of having accurate information about the enemy. He tried discussing this matter of importance several times with the fatty, but the fatty was too scared to care. Because the fatty was abusing the authority of sect leader Wang's command medallion, Ma Rong wasn't even allowed to personally scout around. It seemed apparent that the fatty thought Ma Rong was his personal guard for the preservation of his life. As such, Ma Rong was inside the living room as anxious as a cat on a hot tin roof, and walked around in circles. Nevertheless, he still followed this ignorant fatty. In the Seven Mysteries sect, harsh discipline was given to those who disobeyed orders and took actions without permission. Light offenses were punished by the destruction of one's cultivation and expulsion from the sect. However, it would be difficult to preserve one's life if he or she had committed a heavy offense because the only punishment available was beheading the offender. Ma Rong was fully aware that the world-shaking events occurring outside could likely be a matter of life or death for the sect, but he was unable to move a single step. At this moment, Ma Rong wished that he could slap this so-called superior to death. Meanwhile, Han Li and Li Feiyu did not have the slightest knowledge about what was happening, so they were hurrying to Elder Lil's residence as a result. On the journey there, they met several bandits and had to either avoid or dodge around their enemies. They also hid their tracks as frequently as possible. When they were only a li away, half a kilometer, from Elder Li's residence, they ran directly into a group of black-clothed people and thus were unable to conceal their presence. This was their first encounter with the enemy. Currently, there were over 10 black-clothed people holding steel sabers. They surrounded Han Li, Li Feiyu, and Crooked Soul from every direction. From examining their footwork, it seemed to Han Li that those who had a single line of white embroidery on their sleeves were the weakest of the group as well as the majority of the members. The martial artists with 2 white lines embroidered on their sleeves were a little stronger, but the strongest opponents were the ones with 3 white lines. It was clear that the man with scars on his face was the leader of this group. As the scar-faced leader carefully sized up the men whom he had surrounded, he secretly felt somewhat baffled. It was not surprising that the scar-faced leader felt this way. Standing in the middle of the trio, Li Feiyu had disheveled hair, and his appearance was dirty and worn. He looked as if he were a cook from the mountains. Han Li's eyes were emotionless, while his skin was dark like a farmer who did not know martial arts. However, their lofty builds had produced greater pressure. They also wore bamboo hats. Besides them was a blood-stained Crooked Soul. Standing together, these 3 seemed out of place as they stood together. Even though the scar-faced leader had plenty of experience in Jianghu, he was somewhat puzzled. He sent a gaze toward his subordinates, signaling at them to not let their guard down. He then loudly yelled toward the opposing party, "Regardless of who you are, the Seven Mysteries sect has already fallen. Surrender and your lives will be spared." Han Li smiled, turned his head to Li Feiyu and said, "Who will handle this? Or would you rather have Crooked Soul take care of this?" As Li Feiyu heard his words, his eyes flashed with an ominous glint. He sternly replied, "From these people's clothes, they should be low-level disciples of the Broken Water sect. I've hunted and killed bandits from the Feral Wolf gang for a long time. Let me vent my resentments onto them. Besides, it just so happens that I have a use for their weapons." By the time Li Feiyu had finished talking, the enemy forces were fanned out like a rainbow. In a blink of an eye, Li Feiyu was already in front of the closest man dressed in black. The man in black was surprised and almost forgot about flourishing his steel saber. However, he found that the saber in his hands were suddenly in the hands of his enemy. He hastily recoiled in panic, but it was already too late. A line of light flashed, separating his head from his body. With a series of movements that were neat, nimble, and as quick as lightning, Li Feiyu had already killed many of the Broken Water sect disciples with the stolen saber before they could react against him. The complexions of the people who remained began to greatly change, especially the leader with the disfigured face. Because his martial arts were far greater than the others, his heart had sunk the furthest. He clearly remembered encountering disastrous experts in the past. Back then he couldn't contend against them in the least, therefore he decisively commanded, "Everyone retreat. Scatter. Quickly send out the signal and call the experts for reinforcements." This sentence caught the attention of the other men in black clothes, and they quickly fell back. Because of their original positioning in a circle, they scattered in all directions, fleeing rapidly. Some had run to the side, grabbing something from their bosom. They seemed to have fished out the so-called signal. A black-clothed man with 2 embroidered lines ran the fastest. With just a few steps he had already fled several zhang. TL, 1 zhang is equal to 10 chi or 358 meters, he secretly rejoiced, thinking that there was some hope in fleeing for his life. However, he failed to notice a cool feeling on the back of his neck. A half-inch point pierced through his Adam's apple and then immediately disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, he couldn't help but be overwhelmed with shock. He wanted to yell at the top of his lungs, but suddenly he couldn't feel his body. Losing all his strength, he stared helplessly at his body as he slowly collapsed, his back limp on the floor. He was no longer capable of moving even a single step. At this moment, he realized that a sword had unexpectedly penetrated his throat. This black-clothed person felt unresigned. He had obviously escaped the furthest, so how could he have died so quickly? With great effort he turned his head to the side. Facing death's door, he saw in his final moments an intermittent shadow that had appeared behind the second furthermost distant black-clothed man. With a slash as light as a feather, the shadow flashed and faded away. After that, another fellow sect disciple appeared, and a similar white light flashed. The sword pierced the throat of a fellow sect disciple yet again. Like him, their bodies fell onto the meadow with blood leaking from their throats. After witnessing the shadow's assassinations, this black-clothed man smiled and accepted his death because he knew he would not die alone. Soon he would be accompanied by many others. That shadow was like a demon, and it was unlikely that a single one of the black-clothed disciples could slip away from this demon's grasp. Chapter 81 Jia Tianlong. Chapter 81. Jia Tianlong. At this moment, Golden Wolf, Jia Tianlong appeared smug. Because of the excitement, his normally pale and gloomy face had a slight flush. It was no wonder that he had such an expression. After all, the Seven Mysteries sect was Pharaoh Wolfgang's archenemy. Under his elaborate scheme, all those who were still alive would fall before him. As the commander of Pharaoh Wolfgang, he had the right to be arrogant. He stood halfway between the base of the mountain and setting sun summit. As it turned out, there were around 50 to 60 red-clothed members of the Pharaoh Wolfgang's Iron Guard surrounding the sentry post on the border of Seven Mysteries sect. Jia Tianlong had spent a substantial amount of painstaking effort to meticulously groom his army. Not only were they all highly capable in martial arts, they also had undying loyalty to Jia Tianlong. He had always regarded this army as a precious asset and would not normally utilize it in ordinary battles. However, at this moment, he brought the entire army with him just to completely intimidate the small and mid-sized gangs that were beginning to stir up trouble. The chiefs of Metal Spear Association and Broken Water sect, who had been planning to rebel, were forced to obediently listen to his orders. After all, the smaller gangs did not wish to see Pharaoh Wolfgang standing alone. They all hoped that the two great powers would forever be in the midst of a struggle, creating cracks in which the smaller gangs could exist. Jia Tianlong did not have a decisive personality. Had it not been for the fact that Jia Tianlong had kidnapped the children of the gang chiefs as well as promised the smaller gangs a profit for helping the Pharaoh Wolfgang in this endeavor, the smaller gangs would have changed sides a long time ago. At this thought, Jia Tianlong involuntarily turned his head back to glance at several of the gang chiefs that were standing nearby. All of the people present were downcast. Seeing Jia Tianlong gaze towards them, they either glared back at him or avoided looking at him in the face. Looking at this situation, Jia Tianlong laughed coldly in his heart. Returning his attention to his front, He started thinking of a plan to annex all these small gangs after he took down the Seven Mysteries sect. In front of Jia Tianlong, there were close to 1,000 men present, all wearing different kinds of clothes and holding different weapons. They attacked the Seven Mysteries sect's sentry posts like a swarm of bees. Because there was no formation due to the neglect of cooperation between these people, there were a lot of casualties. However, Jia Tianlong did not care because the people who were currently attacking were not from his Feral Wolf gang. They were people that belonged to the Metal Spear Association and the Broken Water sect. In the first place, he did not place any hope in their ability to take over Setting Sun Summit. He only wanted them to waste the sentries' energies, so that his elite troops and crossbows could easily pick off the remaining exhausted sentries. Thinking of those military-grade rapid-fire crossbows, Jia Tianlong's calm expression revealed a trace of delight. This time, the Feral Wolf gang easily gained a winning advantage through the killing machines that were used by the gang's troops. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to annihilate the opponent's troops. Even if a dozen of the Setting Sun Summit sentry posts were taken down, the Feral Wolf gang's troops would suffer a great loss in strength, making it very detrimental for his future plan to annex the smaller gangs. Jia Tianlong did not spend a slightest bit of effort on the military-grade crossbows. Instead, they appeared out of nowhere in his home. Every time Jia Tianlong recalled that matter, he would immediately feel at ease. This happened 3 months ago when he was at his headquarters, planning an assault on the Seven Mysteries sect. If anyone provoked him during this time, that person would wish he or she was dead. Since it has been breached, why are we not moving? A voice sounding like a broken gong rang out. There was no hint of respect for Commander Jia Tianlong contained in that sentence. Commander Jia Tianlong would have been extremely angry, but instead he turned around and respectfully said, "Master Zhang, I feel that there is something fishy about this breach. I'm afraid there might be a trap located inside. It's better to be a bit more cautious." "What are you afraid of? With me by your side, how can these ordinary people even be able to hurt you? Let's go, let's go. I've been here for close to an entire night, I'm extremely tired. The faster we dispose of these Seven Mysteries sect bastards, the faster I can rest my old bones." This voice did not sound old at all, but he let out an overflowing archaic tone that was very irritating to the ear. Chapter 82 Monk Golden Light. Chapter 82 Monk Golden Light. The person who spoke was a 3-feet-tall dwarf standing beside Jia Tianlong. The dwarf was 40 years old and had a thin body frame that was covered by a red robe embroidered with gold thread. On his finger and around his neck were, respectively, a gold ring and an extremely thick gold chain. Around his waist, several gold bells hung from his belt. Even his gold teeth reflected a golden light whenever he opened his mouth. This was a look that only the rich could afford to have. At this moment, impatience clouded his features. Evidently he was extremely unsatisfied with Jia Tianlong's cautiousness. Disguised as a wealthy merchant from a village, the dwarf actually dared to show such disrespect towards Jia Tianlong. This caused the loyal iron guards standing nearby to glare at the dwarf with extreme rage smoldering in their eyes. This dwarf could obviously see the rage within the eyes of Jia Tianlong's loyal iron guards, and he coldly laughed as if he did not put them in his eyes at all. He even arrogantly stated, "Commander Jia, you spent 3,000 taels of gold to invite me over. Surely the money you spent was not just for me to passively stare in vain for an entire night, correct? Whoever you need me to deal with, just tell me directly. However, you don't need me to deal with the sect leader of the Seven Mysteries sect, right? Against such a weak person you can just settle it yourself. Why do you still need to spend money and hire me for assistance? Just a mere sect leader of the Seven Mysteries sect truly does not warrant the attention of a mortal master. The reason why I invited a mortal master was because the sect leader of the Seven Mysteries sect still has 3 senior martial uncles. On the surface, these 3 people have been declared dead, but in reality, they have been undergoing closed-door cultivation inside a hidden chamber on Setting Sun Summit. I'm afraid that their current cultivation bases have already broken through to the transformation realm. Against these martial uncles, ordinary experts would not be a match for them. These 3 people are the strongest pillars of the Seven Mysteries sect. Thus, I have no choice but to humbly beseech Immortal Master to deal with them for us." Jia Tianlong sounded extremely pathetic, without a hint of anger in his voice. Jia Tianlong had coincidentally met this red-robed dwarf in a Taoist temple near the border of the Savage Lands. A self-proclaimed monk Golden Light, this martial arts expert was equipped with immense magical powers, and he had demonstrated techniques for controlling flying swords and cultivating an invulnerable steel body. After Jia Tianlong personally witnessed this, he was deeply mesmerized by the might displayed by the two techniques. When he suspected that the dwarf was most likely someone who had walked the fabled path of immortals, he decided to establish a relationship with him. After knowing that the dwarf had an extreme obsession with gold, Jia Tianlong immediately gifted a huge amount of gold to the dwarf. With this, he had finally moved the dwarf's heart, obtaining a promise that the dwarf would help him with his problems just once. Thus, Jia Tianglong acted meek and humble like someone from the junior generation whenever he was in the dwarf's presence, not daring to reveal the slightest bit of disrespect. He was very clear in his heart. This monk Golden Light was someone that his tiny feral wolf gang was unable to contend with. After monk Golden Light heard his request, he let out a crazed laughter. Once his laughter subsided, he exclaimed arrogantly, "Just a few mortals? Leave them to me. No matter how high their cultivation bases have reached, no matter how strong their martial arts are, they would definitely not be a match for my flying sword technique. You can just relax. Then I will have to trouble a mortal master." This figure had a wooden hairpin on, and the only equipment he had on his body was a long sword in a white scabbard. His face was incomparably pale, but his eyes were bright. Wherever he looked, those who met his gaze felt as if sharp swords had cut into their hearts, causing them to shiver despite the warm air. After leaving the hall and walking 10 meters away, he stopped as he slowly contemplated the crowd standing in front of him, without a trace of fear in his eyes. Finally, his vision landed upon Jia Tianlong's right hand that was raised up in the air. His gaze moved from Jia Tianlong's right arm to Jia Tianlong's face. Jia Tianlong. This middle-aged man shouted out the name of Commander Jia. Wang Juechu. Not wanting to appear weak, Jia Tianlong also shouted out the name of his adversary. Speaking of which, this is the first time that we've met face to face as the respective leaders of our individual camps, is it not? My dear sect leader Wang. Jia Tianlong used a leisurely tone as traces of a mocking smile hung upon his lips. He slowly retracted his extended right arm from the air. Wang Juechu stared expressionlessly at Jia Tianlong without saying anything. The atmosphere began to grow increasingly tense. Sect leader Wang came to this place alone. Could it be that you intend to surrender? Smiling, Jia Tianlong asked this question with a hint of ridicule. You are correct. I wanted to discuss with you matters regarding a surrender. The Seven Mystery sect leader Wang Juechu replied icily, similar to in sculpture made of frigid snow. Chapter 83 A Huge Pitfall. Chapter 83, A Huge Pitfall. Do you truly plan to surrender? Jia Tianlong felt somewhat surprised. To surrender is to surrender. However, which side will surrender to whom? That has not yet been decided. Saying this slowly, sect leader Wang narrowed his eyes and consciously brought his hand to the longsword's hilt. What is the meaning behind your words? Jia Tianlong's face sank, but soon after he waved his hand, signaling his men to surround sect leader Wang. Immediately, his iron guards rushed forth from behind him and surrounded Wang Juechu in a semicircle. At the same time they took out powerful crossbows. With flashes of green light, the iron guards pointed their crossbow bolts at him. It seemed that with a single command from Jia Tianlong, they would indiscriminately release a barrage of arrows without hesitation, immediately shooting at Wang Juechu on the spot. You believe that just because we moved the sect's lower-ranked disciples to Setting Sun Summit, we had never thought of an external enemy invasion and thus were incapable of resisting? Sect leader Wang's voice contained a somewhat menacing and sinister tone as he seemed to have turned a blind eye to the crossbow bolts. Hearing these words, Jia Tianlong's heart slightly sunk. His mind felt a trace of obscure foreboding. He didn't interrupt the sect leader Wang's words and instead continued to have a gloomy expression on his face. Jia Tianlong wanted to hear what his enemy ultimately had to say. The one who migrated the sect to this location was the 7th generation sect leader Li. Not only did that person have great skill and strategies, he was also an expert in construction and machinery. He was named the top genius of his generation. With this said, sect leader Wang shortly paused, expressing a hint of admiration. He opened his mouth and continued, Sect leader Li selected Setting Sun Summit as the sect's main hall. There were 2 reasons for this. One reason is that the mountain peak is dangerous. Because it is easy to guard and hard to attack, it is an exceptional defensive location strategically. The second reason is that within the center of this mountain peak lies a vast natural stalactite cave. This cave is wonderful beyond compare. It occupies nearly 2/3 of the setting sun summit. Seeing this marvel, sect leader Li made plans in his mind to integrate of all the construction techniques he possessed with the terrain of the stalactite cave, and he turned the entire mountain peak into a huge natural pitfall. So long as there were people to activate the mechanism, the entire mountain peak would immediately collapse, burying all the people on the summit. After sect leader Wang finished talking, he stayed silent. He swept his eyes over the crowd before him with a cold gaze that one would use on a corpse. After Jia Tianlong finished hearing this, he stood in amazement. He naturally did not believe the opposition's words, but after a few moments he did not know how he would refute sect leader Wang's menacing words. The others on the mountain clearly heard these words. They all couldn't help but become restless and talk about it softly. A few of the somewhat clever ones had even begun to slowly draw closer to the only road off the mountain. They were prepared to wildly rush off the mountain the moment something went wrong. Silence. Those clamoring or flailing about will be killed mercilessly. Jia Tianlong quickly regained his calm. Seeing his own men turn disorderly on just a bluff, he couldn't help but become irritated. He knew that if he did not immediately put a stop to their restlessness, the situation would become a lot harder to control. He soon acted without thinking and loudly issued a stern command. Jia Tianlong's order was well executed by his loyal subordinates. After they beheaded a few of the cowards that had attempted to escape, the rest were intimidated and quelled, their roars suppressed. However, Jia Tianlong understood that this suppression was only superficial and temporary. If he could not confirm what the opponent had said were lies, regardless of what gang or faction the men belonged to, they would all be unable to stay here at ease. He feared that this rumor would spread and cause all of them to flee. You can't convince us that your words are true on the mere basis that you said them. Jia Tianlong strongly restrained the anger in his heart, intending to personally expose sect leader Wang's fabrication. Of course not. I have plenty of proof. Just stay here and see it for yourself. Regardless of whether or not you heard properly, if someone were to see my proof and intends to escape or possibly continue their assault, I would activate the entire mechanism and end us all. Wang Juechu's words were filled with desire to kill as his menacing intentions were undoubtedly revealed. Jia Tianlong carefully examined his enemy's expression, trying to find some mistake or gap in his state of mind. Unfortunately, Wang Juechu's face was ice cold through and through. No indication of falsehood had appeared, nor was the slightest degree of false confidence shown. Jia Tianlong couldn't help but murmur to himself, "Don't tell me that sect leader Wang's words were not a deception, but rather an actual scheme to destroy anyone on the summit, including the sect? Activate the second mechanism." Wang Juechu suddenly turned his head to the sect hall and loudly commanded. He then turned his head to the side and began staring at the comparatively small stone hall, no longer paying attention to Jia Tianlong. Seeing his opponent look down on him in such way, Jia Tianlong couldn't help but be angry. With great difficulty, he resisted the anger in his heart and inwardly resolved himself. So long as the opponent's evidence did not satisfy him, he would immediately give the order to turn this sect leader Wang into a human-shaped hedgehog. However, Wang Juechu's strange stare towards the stone hall had aroused the attention of the feral wolf gang members. They couldn't help but turn their gazes as well, wanting to see if anything strange would occur. The feral wolf gang members were all restless. None of them took notice of two people wearing Broken Water sect clothing lowering their heads and whispering, "Han Li, do you think what our sect leader said was true? Don't tell me that this huge setting sun summit is truly hollow? I have come here several times before and never felt anything amiss in this place. Could it be that sect leader Wang is trying to deceive them in order to stall for time? Maybe." A young man was talking to a taciturn youth in the midst of the crowd, discussing the offensive. It seemed that they had great doubts regarding Wang Juechu's explanation. These two people were not bystanders, but were in fact Han Li and Li Feiyu, who had rushed to Elder Li's residence in disguise. Chapter 84: A Tremendous Battle. Chapter 84. A tremendous battle. Earlier, Han Li was afraid that the Broken Water sect's disciples would escape and alert the other enemies, so he had to personally get involved. Using shifting smoke steps and imperial flight technique in unison, he easily killed all the enemies in a short span of time. Li Feiyu, who was thinking of continuing his attack, was dumbstruck. Only then did he realize Han Li's true strength. After recovering from his dazed state, Li Feiyu was shocked that Han Li was able to possess such astonishing skill. Han Li's battle prowess was a result of cultivating blinking sword art. This kind of thinking caused him to panic the moment he stepped up into the arena and immediately disturbed his own inner strength, wishing he had cultivated in the blinking sword art. Luckily, he knew the bitter truth. Regardless of time or aptitude, it was too late for him to switch to a different sword art. Further down the road, Li Feiyu continuously threw up his heart's grief and sighed heavily at the lucky bastard Han Li for being able to learn such a terrifying skill. Han Li was not in the mood to comprehend his good friend's sour mood. Instead, he started to ruthlessly kill all the enemies he met, intending to reveal his true strength. All the enemies that encountered Han Li's strange technique were neither able to withstand nor receive a single blow. They all breathed their last breath of air, and even the high-ranked experts were no exception. With Han Li's exhibition of might, the two of them easily reached Elder Li's residence and saw Ma Rong. They received news from Ma Rong that Elder Li and Zhang Xiu'er had already ascended Setting Sun Summit. Upon hearing this grievous news, Li Feiyu's face turned green. He knew that the current Setting Sun Summit was an extremely dangerous place. Zhang Xiu'er entering that area was like setting a foot into the gates of hell. With the lack of a better option, the two of them discussed for a moment and came out of Elder Li's residence, hurriedly heading towards to the direction of Setting Sun Summit. But upon their departure, there was a minor disturbance. When the two of them were about to leave, that loathsome fatty, the trusted aide of sect leader Wang, took out the command medallion and ordered them threateningly to stay behind or else he would deal with them according to the sect's rules. Currently, Li Feiyu was very impatient as he was only concerned with Zhang Xiu'er's safety. He could care less about the sect rules, so he extended his hand and knocked the long-winded fatty unconscious to the ground. Then he ordered his subordinates to continue protecting everyone while he and Han Li turned and left quickly. When they reached the vicinity of Setting Sun Summit, the two of them were frightened by the sheer numbers of enemies. Knowing that it was impossible to charge forward, Han Li and Li Feiyu discussed with each other and came up with a brilliant plan. They knocked out two disciples of Broken Water sect and changed into their clothes. Then they took advantage of the dark sky and the crowd's confusion to stealthily mix in with those who were about to attack the mountain, follow the stream of traffic and easily reach Setting Sun Summit. There Han Li and Li Feiyu had heard everything that sect leader Wang had said. Because Crooked Soul's body was too conspicuous, they found an area at the bottom of the mountain in which they could hide him and left him there. After hearing that the Setting Sun Summit had kept such a deadly trump card that enabled it to perish with its enemies, Li Feiyu could not conceal his doubts and started to repeatedly ask Han Li, hoping that his good friend might set his heart at ease. Regardless whether this is true or fake, the most important thing to us right now is to quickly enter the main hall and meet with your young beloved and secretly slip away. You must be aware that regardless whether the information is authentic or not, staying here is too dangerous. Han Li finally replied in a low voice. This is all true, but under the watchful eye of the crowd, how it is possible to go in secretly? Li Feiyu asked with a worried look on his face as he lowered his head. So, we can only wait and see if any opportunities arise later on. Han Li was also feeling quite helpless. Just as the two of them hiding at the back of the crowd started to get agitated, the ground beneath their feet suddenly trembled. At first it was just a slight tremor, but subsequently, it became quite violent. A lot of people were unable to stand and began to tumble one by one onto the ground. Following the summit's trembling, there were also several mountain boulders that began to roll down. Not good. The mountain peak is about to collapse. That surnamed Wang wants to bring us down along with him. Some reckless person within the group shouted in a panic. When people heard this, the majority of them became even more panic-stricken. Some even disregarded previous Wang Juechu's warning and frantically tried to escape towards the road's intersection in an attempt to flee the mountain peak that they believed was about to collapse. Boom! A rumble of explosions rang out as the surrounding area started to collapse. The ground also shook more intensely. Hearing the loud noises, everyone thought that this was the start of the collapse of the mountain peak and couldn't help but to give up all hope. At this moment, Jia Tianlong was alarmed and furious. Even though he was escorted by the loyal Iron Guards, he was at a loss in his heart, unsure of what to do. He couldn't help but to look towards Monk Golden Light. Jia Tianlong smiled wryly after he clearly saw the look of panic on Monk Golden Light's face. So this person was also unable to protect himself. Jia Tianlong's initial admiration for this figure was immediately reduced. And here I thought people from Feral Wolf Gang were all fearless heroes. Turns out you are all a mob. At this moment Wang Juchen suddenly ridiculed. Despite the confusion at the summit, Wang Juchen's words transmitted to everyone's ears, clearly caused by pure skill. Following his words, the ground miraculously stopped trembling. It was as if the mountain peak had suppressed its anger in a split second, recovering its former tranquility. At this moment the crowd discovered that the small stone hall had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an astonishingly large hole. A few courageous people took 2 paces forward and looked down from the edge. They couldn't help but gasp at the sight of the large, pitch-black hole. Since it was impossible to see the bottom of the hole, they knew that its depth was unfathomable. "Commander Jia, can this evidence be considered proof of what I have to say?" Wang Juchen coldly asked. Jia Tianlong's face paled slightly. Chapter 85 Bloody Battle, Death Contract. Chapter 85, Bloody Battle, Death Contract. "I only have 2 conditions and they are simple," Wang Juechu expressionlessly said. "First, your men have to evacuate outside of my sect's sphere of influence, and they have to do so in groups under the supervision of my sect's disciples." His tone hardened considerably. "Sure, that's not a problem," Jia Tianlong replied without hesitation. Seeing how his opponent answered so steadfastly, Wang Juechu coldly laughed as he directly told Jia Tianlong his second condition. "Second, both you and I have to sign a death contract and fight in a duel before you all can leave." "Death contract? Are you serious? Has he gone mad?" As Wang Juechu's sentence left his mouth, it caused a huge ruckus to break out among the crowd. All those who heard the sentence had varied expressions on their faces. Some were excited, some were ashen, while some were eager to see the outcome of the duel. After hearing sect leader Wang's conditions, Jia Qianlong's expression flickered before swiftly reverting back to its normal state. "Did I hear that condition incorrectly? Both of us sign a death contract and fight until there is only one survivor?" After his seemingly nonchalant question, Jia Tianlong broke out into a laugh. "No, your ears are fine. This is to collect the blood debt for vice sect leader Wu and the others who died. Thus, I have no choice but to propose this. A death contract between you and me," Wang Juechu stated coldly, staring directly at Jia Tianlong with his hand on his sword. Jia Tianlong laughed but did not give an immediate reply. His eyes flashed while he pondered. It appeared that he did not dare to treat this lightly and would only answer after deep contemplation. Voices broke out in discussion among the crowd. Even the oblivious Han Li couldn't take it anymore and chose to question Li Feiyu, who was standing by his side, instead. "What is a death contract? Seems like it's something incredible." "What? You don't even know about death contracts? This is too inconceivable. Of all the ways to settle the disputes of Jianghu, this is, by far, the most famous and bloody method." Stunned with amazement, Li Feiyu explained with a facial expression akin to the fascination of meeting a ghost. "You don't say. You should know that I barely know anything beyond God Hand Valley and have no interest regarding matters of Jianghu. Is it really so strange that I did not know?" Han Li replied in a low tone, seemingly in a bad mood. "Oh, right, true enough, I almost forgot." Li Feiyu scratched his head in embarrassment. The death contract is often used by 2 parties who have great hatred and enmity towards each other. Before their battle, they would sign a life-death statement, stating that after they enter the battle, they would battle until there would only be a single survivor. If someone left halfway, not only would that person's reputation plummet and face everyone's disdain, anyone in the entirety of Jianghu would have the right to kill him. Because all the people of Jianghu believe that death contracts are extremely sacred, those who destroy or taint the essence of this contract will be annihilated as a warning to others. What's more is that most of these battles are staged in arenas where people have often fought to death, consequently appearing even more bloody and cruel than normal. In recent years, the number of people using this method to resolve their disputes has lessened. Li Feiyu slowly and elaborately explained. After hearing the explanation, Han Li furrowed his brows as he understood the true meaning of death contracts. He seemed to disapprove of sect leader Wang's decision to enter into a death contract with Jia Tianlong. From his perspective, this would only end with 1 dead and 1 grievously injured. In the first place, if there was to be such an ending, it might as well not be started at all. Sect leader Wang might as well just let the enemy go free or just kill the enemy straight away, saving himself from all this unnecessary trouble. Fine, I agree. Let's enter into a death contract. After repeatedly deliberating, Jia Qianlong's gaze roaming about before riveting on the figure of Monk Golden Light. Then he made his final decision. Since Jia Qianlong's opponent wanted to use this as an excuse to kill him, wasn't this a good opportunity for him to remove the roots of the troublesome Seven Mysteries sect? Jia Tianlong was very clear about what Wang Juechu was thinking. He obviously wanted the support of his 3 hidden martial uncles. But what a pity, he had already knew of their existences through reports from his spies and had already prepared countermeasures against them. With the immortal cultivator and his flying swords techniques by his side, his chances of winning the battle was definitely more than 90%. As long as he killed Wang Juechu as well as the remaining experts of the Seven Mysteries sect during the death match, it would be worth it. Even if his attack failed this time around, there was no cause for concern because the next time he attacked, the Seven Mysteries sect would no longer have any strength to resist. After all, nurturing an expert was not something that could be done within a single year. Thus, this was the reason why the cautious Jia Tianlong would now chose to take such a risk and agree to sign the death contract. Sect Leader Wang. According to rules of the death contract, you should be the one to select the time and location of the battle. I will have no objections, but as for the number of fighters and methods of battle, I should be the one to decide, am I right? An enigmatic smile spread on Jia Tianlong's face. HMMP. You are right, Wang Juechu answered somewhat unwillingly. Okay then. I want the number of people fighting to be 150 men from each party in a battle royal. With no signs of being courteous, Jia Tianlong directly stated his request. 50 people? Battle royal? Sect leader Wang's cold face actually revealed a hint of surprise. Death contract battles allowed multiple people to take part to prevent one side's strength to be greatly depleted. However, 20 or 30 people was already considered excessive, and Jia Qianlong's proposed method of battle royal, was rarely used in comparison to one-on-one battles. However, since it was Wang Juechu himself who requested the death contract battle, there was no way he could take back his words. Moreover, he was extremely confident in the battle prowess of his 3 senior martial uncles. Even if it was a battle royal, victory would most assuredly belong to his side. Moreover, as long as he was able to kill Jia Tianlong, it would be worth it no matter how great a price he had to pay. As long as this scheming Jia Tianlong died, he was sure that the forces under him would almost immediately try to fight to be the next gang leader, resulting in the gang splintering into different groups as they vied for power and authority. This would no longer make them a threat to Wang Juechu's Seven Mysteries sect. As he thought of this, sect leader Wang nodded his head, agreeing to his opponent's request. Men, go prepare the arena and the death contract. Wang Juechu commanded in a stern voice to the people standing behind him. Chapter 86 A Sudden Change. Chapter 86. A sudden change. Following his orders, 30 brightly dressed disciples rushed from the sect hall. None of these people uttered even a single word. In front of the hall, they wordlessly used wooden stakes and ropes to create the arena for the death fight. From their swift movements, it was evident that these people were proficient in martial arts. Unlike the common low-ranking disciples of the Seven Mysteries sect witnessing the sight of the duel being created, Li Feiyu asked Han Li in distraught, "Don't tell me that we're going to hide here the whole time. Are we going to do nothing and idly watch their duel? This isn't right. This isn't right? Your young lover is currently not in danger and is actually quite safe. We'll wait for the duel to finish. Once the Pharaoh Wolf gang evacuates, we'll take advantage of the disorder and stealthily make our way to young Lady Zhang. Since the survivors of the Seven Mysteries sect will most likely want to use you as a scapegoat and place all the blame on you, the 2 of you have to escape to a faraway place where they can't find you," Han Li said indifferently. It seemed that he didn't have a deep sense of belonging towards the Seven Mysteries sect. Wouldn't that be eloping? That won't do, Xiaoer wouldn't agree to it. Li Feiyu shook his head as if he were beating a drum with it. Then knock her out and take her away by force. By the time she wakes up, it would be too late to change anything. Isn't that good enough? Han Li replied nonchalantly. You. Li Feiyu angrily glared at Han Li, unable to speak another word. While these 2 individuals were completely engaged in a conversation with each other, sect leader Wang solemnly received 2 blood-red scrolls. These were the death contracts. He took one for himself and ordered someone to bring the other to Jia Tianlong, who was across from him. As Jia Tianlong accepted the document, his expression changed to one of solemnness. He carefully opened the document and cautiously skimmed through it. Once he verified that there was no problem, he nodded his head and closed the document. He then began selecting soldiers to fight in the death match. After filtering through his available men, He selected 13 elite experts from the Feral Wolf gang. In addition, he selected tens of martial artists with acceptable talents from the smaller gangs in order to lessen his own losses. In any case, once they signed their names on the death contract, these martial artists would have to fight with all their might in order to preserve their insignificant lives, regardless of whether or not they were willing. As for the remaining candidates, Jia Tianlong picked some of his capable iron guards. Of course, Monk Golden Light was certain to take the stage. Jia Tianlong was completely counting on the great martial prowess of this immortal cultivator's flying sword technique. While Jia Tianlong was busy, he did not notice that Wang Juechu had returned to the stone hall. Until now, Jia Tianlong still hadn't seen sect leader Wang return, making Jia Tianlong think that Wang Juechu was probably having difficulty deciding the candidates for the death match. When the death match stage had been thoroughly completed, sect leader Wang brought out 300 to 400 people out from the hall. Within this crowd was a mixture of young and old disciples of both genders. However, each and every one of them had a spirited light in their eyes and walked with steady steps. It was evident they were the 7 mystery sects elites. The ones Jia Tianlong was most cautious of were the 3 figures following behind Wang Juechu. The first individual wore a fluttering scholar's jacket, and his face appeared intellectual and scholarly-like. The second was tall and sturdy with his chest bare. His full beard, resembling steel needles, gave him a valiant appearance that was incomparable. Last was a person wearing gray clothes. He carried a long sword on his back and had a cold expression. At first glance, these people seemed to be middle-aged men, 30 to 40 years old. However, close examination revealed that they released an aura that exuded the passage of time, an aura equivalent to that of an elderly man of 70 to 80 years. It made onlookers feel like the ages of these middle-aged men did not match their young external appearances. TL, passage of time, literally means the blue sea turned into mulberry fields. Figuratively, it represents the worldly passage of time or how time brings a great change to the world. Jia Tianlong's mind was clear. These 3 were definitely Wang Juechu's 3 martial uncles. It seemed that the 7 mystery sect would not hold anything back, even going as far as summoning its reserves. Thinking of this, Jia Tianlong leaned to the side and pointed his finger at those 3 martial uncles for the dwarf Mink Golden Light. He asked, "Monk, I don't know how you feel about those 3, but can you take them down? They are nothing more than ordinary folk. With a wave of my flying swords, their small lives will be finished. What is there to be worried about? Do you not trust me?" Monk Golden Light said this with a somewhat dismissive tone and gave Jia Tianlong a dissatisfied glare. I wouldn't dare. I merely asked without thinking. Please do not take it to heart, monk." Jia Tianlong promptly responded with a smiling face, fearing that he might have offended the person on whom he was currently most relying. Humph. After the dwarf heard these words, his anger gradually vanished. Only after seeing this did Jia Tianlong's heart calm down. This great immortal cultivator was truly not easy to please. He bitterly smiled to himself and hastily turned his body before shouting loudly, "Are you not ready? Begin signing the death contract." Following this berating voice, those from the Feral Wolf gang that were participating in the death match started to solemnly write down their names on the death contract. After they signed their names, their fighting spirit burst forth. Not to be outdone, Wang Juechu commanded with a cold voice, "Sign the death contract." Immediately, tens of warriors who had been chosen to participate emerged from the crowd of 7 mystery sect members and walked forward to sign the death contract. Han Li's gaze naturally fell on those who marched out as he tried to see if there were any acquaintances among them. He also saw sect leader Wang's 3 martial uncles. However, he didn't take them to mind. He skimmed the crowd with a hurried glance until an elderly man with a blue-green jacket entered his line of sight. With a single look at this old man's appearance, Han Li could not help but exhale in a low voice, "Elderly." This was the man whose life Han Li had actually saved before, Marong's master, Elderly. He was unexpectedly a participant of the death match. This was far beyond Han Li's expectations. Han Li retracted his gaze and hastily turned his face. Slapping Li Feiyu's shoulder with all his strength, he said, "Did you see that? Elderly is there and wants to sign the death contract." Li Feiyu expressionlessly stood there, motionless, as he surveyed the distance from an elevated view. As if he hadn't heard his friend, Li Feiyu had an extremely stupefied expression. "Hey, what's the matter?" Han Li was somewhat surprised. Even if Elderly wants to sign the death contract, it's not like he's going to die, right? He strangely asked. Once Li Feiyu heard those words, his vision finally returned. He blankly gazed at Han Li and uttered a sentence that instantly stunned Han Li. Sure? Sure, she is also there. She also wants to participate in the death contract battle. Upon uttering these words, Li Feiyu's face instantly became extremely unsightly. Chapter 87 Prominent Skill. Chapter 87, Prominent Skill, where? Han Li hastily asked after he came to his senses. There. Following Li Feiyu's gaze, Han Li finally found a pale-faced Zhang Xiu'er within the corner of the crowd. At this moment she was standing with two other girls who were also participating in the death match. Wearing thin white clothing, she slightly bit her almond lips, making her whole figure seem like a white-colored flower, lovely and fragile. How could weak women like Lady Zhang participate in such a bloody battle? Did that one surnamed Wang make a mistake? Han Li, who was still unwilling to believe his eyes, questioned incredulously. Xiu'er is also an inner disciple of the 7 Supreme Division, did I not tell you before? Li Feiyu replied, smiling bitterly as he said something that Han Li felt was unexpected. Han Li remained silent and speechless. It was clearly evident that the 7 mystery sect's remaining experts were few in number and that sect leader Wang did not have any protective feelings for the Pharaohess *X. In order to prevail in this dire situation, he even sent out a girl like Zhang Xiu'er, almost as if he was planning to stake everything on this one move. Brother, I'll get straight to the point. I want to be with Zhang Xiu'er. Take care of yourself. Li Feiyu lightly said, placing his hand onto Han Li's shoulder. He then turned his body and walked towards the arena. He hadn't even walked 2 steps before he heard a light sigh from behind him, followed closely by a fluctuation in the air. Instantly, another person appeared by his side. Han Li. What's so big about this? Isn't it only a death contract battle? This small situation is not difficult for me to handle. Since we are friends, I can help you with this small matter. Han Li said with a hint of a smile. Having heard this, Li Feiyu did not say anything further and exerted his strength to pat Han Li's chest, quietly saying, Good brother. Thank you so much. Han Li kept a smile on his face, not saying another word. It was just as he said. The reason why he followed was partly because he knew Li Feiyu for quite a long time, so their relationship was quite close. As such, Han Li was unwilling to look on helplessly as Li Feiyu ventured off by himself. On the other hand, Han Li was a highly skilled and bold individual. He did not believe that the Pharaoh Wolf Gang's so-called experts could pose much of a threat to him with his fireball and imperial flight technique. On top of this, he also was a bit eager to test his own strength. The 2 men strode forward, squeezing through the crowd and heading straight for Wang Juechu's side. Halfway, the 2 ripped off their Broken Water sect uniforms, revealing their 7 Mysteries sect attires. Han Li and Li Feiyu's sudden appearance and change in identity caused both sides to stare at them foolishly. No one tried to prevent their movements, allowing them to easily arrive in front of Wang Juechu. Division Head Li. Dr. Han. Upon seeing Li Feiyu, Zhang Xiu'er was pleased beyond expectation. Her coquettish face revealed her to be pleasantly surprised, and if the area wasn't filled with so many people, she might have thrown herself in her lover's embrace, pouring her heart out. Sect leader Wang also recognized the 2 individuals, his eyes revealing a trace of surprise. To him, their sudden appearance was very unexpected. External Blade Division's division head deputy Li Feiyu pays his respects to the sect leader. Li Feiyu spoke loudly. The 2 of us wish to sign the death contract and join the death match. He directly stated his request, not waiting for the others to question him about his appearance. Meanwhile, Han Li stood to the side without making a sound, maintaining an appearance similar to that of Li Feiyu and sect leader Ma. Hearing Li Feiyu speak, sect leader Wang swallowed down the words he was originally obligated to ask. The cold look on his face revealed a hint of a smile as he warmly said, Very well. As expected of our 7 Mysteries sect's loyal disciples. With Division Head Li joining the battle, the sect will surely receive a better chance at victory. However, I think it would be better if Dr. Han does not join. After all, his medical expertise is very crucial to our sect. If something were to happen to him in the death match, it would be a fatal loss. Hearing these words, Han Li gave a faint smile. Instead of waiting for Li Feiyu's explanation, he shifted slightly, causing his body to disappear right in front of sect leader Wang. Sect leader Wang was surprised, and just as he was about to look in all 4 sides, he heard Han Li's lazy voice drift over from behind him. I don't know if my own skill is worthy of sect leader Ma's attention, but if I were to enter the death match, I believe that I would be able to protect myself. Therefore, I hope that sect leader will accept my loyalty." Sect leader Ma's heart was overwhelmed with shock. He would have never thought that Han Li, who was renowned in the sect for his medical expertise, would also possess such a terrifying martial skill. Unexpectedly, Han Li was able to soundlessly penetrate Wang Juechu's defense and approach his back without attracting Wang Juechu's attention. Such terrifying skill. Just who exactly is this person? Hidden within our sect, just what is his purpose? A train of fearful ideas sprang forth in quick succession within Wang Juechu's mind. He turned his body and looked at the seemingly harmless Han Li. Sect leader Wang couldn't help but draw his gaze to his own three martial uncles, only to see that the three martial uncles' facial expressions had also changed slightly. Their eyes revealed a hint of shock, making it evident that Dr. Han's skill caused them to feel unrestrained fear. A series of different thoughts rushed around in sect leader Wang's mind, but he finally made a decision. He abruptly laughed loudly before cordially saying, "Dr. Han's heart must have been wholly devoted to the sect. As the sect leader, how could I possibly refuse?" He then used his finger to point at the two disciples whose skills were the weakest out of all of them. They stepped out of the lineup, allowing Han Li and Li Feiyu to take their places. Sect leader Wang also allowed Han Li and Li Feiyu to use black ink to write their names in the blood-red death contract, permitting them to become members of the death match. The commotion within the Seven Mysteries sect was naturally witnessed by Jia Tianlong, and even though he felt that the adding of two experts was a bit unexpected, he did not put it within his heart. After all, he believed that the fleshy body of mortals would be unable to stop Monk Golden Light's flying sword technique. Therefore, both sides finished signing their respective death contracts and exchanging them, thus signaling the start of the death match. Only one side would be able to leave alive. Han Li knew that on this mountain peak, there was no one other than the dwarf who understood how to use magic techniques. It was obvious to him that the dwarf used an incantation similar to that of Soul Lock Talisman. However, Han Li felt that this technique was even more powerful than the Soul Lock Talisman. When no one was watching, Han Li quickly activated Heaven's Eye technique by reciting its incantations. Having activated it, he hurriedly turned his gaze in the dwarf's direction. He saw that beneath the golden aura, there was a flickering white light on the dwarf's body. When compared to the golden aura, this white light was too faint. If one was not looking for it, he or she would have most likely not been able to notice its existence. This dwarf was actually an immortal cultivator whose magic power was much lower than Han Li's. This caused Han Li to be delighted and anguished at the same time. He was delighted because, as a beginner, his magic power was richer when compared to the dwarf's, which signified that the dwarf had merely dabbled in immortal cultivation. Han Li also felt anguished because he did not know whether or not the dwarf knew any other magic techniques of which he was not aware. As such, he was not sure if he would be able to handle the dwarf. Chapter 89 Spear and Shield. Chapter 89 Spear and Shield. Han Li turned his head to look at sect leader Wang, who had a gloomy countenance. In that moment, the three men standing near sect leader Wang had a great change in expression and started talking amongst themselves. It seemed that the dwarf's golden light was not something to be trifled with. Covered by the golden light, the dwarf started laughing with his head facing the sky. Soon after, he domineeringly shouted, "This venerable master is standing here motionlessly and will allow you to attack as you please. If there is no one here capable of breaking this monk's gold barrier, then not a single one of your insignificant lives will be spared." After this was said, he gave an arrogant sneer. Monk Golden Light's speech had thoroughly changed the Seven Mysteries sect disciples' apprehension into rage. Immediately, many valiant martial artists wanted to rush out from the crowd and charge straight toward the dwarf. However, sect leader Wang stopped them. Wang Juechu waved his arm, signaling the protectors at the scene to return. Then he said a few words to the tall and sturdy man, who nodded his head and walked step by step toward to the dwarf, upright and unafraid. As the dwarf saw the fully bearded man walking toward him, a malicious gaze flashed in his eyes. Because his natural body was deformed, he had been ridiculed since a young age. As a result, he especially detested bold individuals with tall and lofty figures. This man before him fell within his scope of resentment. He was already thinking of what cruel method he should use to torment him. The bare-chested man was one of Wang Juechu's three martial uncles. If one did not see his full bearded face, they would have thought him to be an oaf. However, his true age had already passed a cycle of 60 years. He used to be known as a valiant and brave individual in the Seven Mysteries sect, killing countless enemies for the sake of the sect. Confronted with this strange golden barrier, he naturally would not act rashly. This person examined the barrier and glanced at Monk Golden Light protected within. He cracked a smile and with two extended fingers, he flicked the golden barrier, causing a clear dang sound. This frivolous act agitated Monk Golden Light. He sinisterly said, "Do you wish for this immortal master to send you to an early reincarnation?" As the martial uncle listened to these words, his expression changed. He unexpectedly strode forward a single step, arriving at the dwarf's side. Lifting his leg once more, he appeared behind the dwarf. In order to get to the mind of Monk Golden Light, the martial uncle circled around him with long strides and increasingly faster revolutions. In a blink of an eye, his figure became indistinct. Monk Golden Light was incapable of seeing him clearly. Monk Golden Light had become dizzy from the opponent's continuous rotations, causing the fury in his heart to intensify. Without taking the time to think, he brought his hand to the inside of his robe, seemingly with the intention to take something out. Just then, the circling bearded man naturally took notice of his opponent's actions. He suddenly let out a long whistle that resembled a dragon's cry and a tiger's hiss. The whistle was both strong and lengthy. It shook the ears of everyone on Setting Sun Summit with a droning noise that also affected leaves and branches of the trees nearby. After Monk Golden Light heard the whistle, his shaking hands were rendered powerless. His hand stretched toward his bosom, but unexpectedly, he did not withdraw it. Suddenly, the sharp, loud sounds of bursting joints came from the bearded man. They grew more and more hurried until finally the sounds were like the winds and rain of a torrential storm. The sounds had even covered the whistling. The bearded man had circled to the front of the dwarf and stopped. He then stopped whistling and the sound of his joints bursting had stopped. At this moment, those who were clear-headed discovered that the bearded man's body had changed dramatically since his revolutions. The muscles on his chest and arms were greatly bulging outwards and were pure black, as if cast in living iron. When compared to the dwarf, it was as if he were a giant. While Monk Golden Light was gasping for air, he took out a thin long box from his bosom. This wooden box was completely dark and was covered by a paper talisman that sealed the contents. Without waiting for the dwarf to tear off the paper talisman, the gigantic spirited man extended his huge hand like a palm leaf fan, and without politeness, he ruthlessly smashed against the golden light. The strike rocked the barrier, deforming it and causing the dwarf to sway incessantly, making the unstable dwarf incapable of tearing off the paper talisman. Monk Golden Light's mind was overwhelmed with shock. He was fully aware of the might of the golden barrier surrounding him. This man was actually capable of striking and deforming it, which required a great amount of godly force. The contempt in his heart could not help but almost entirely vanish. His hands moved more quickly to tear off the paper talisman. With the sound of tearing paper, the talisman had finally been ripped off. Monk Golden Light's face showed an expression of joy. He then heard a thump, as the bearded man unleashed strikes against the golden barrier in quick succession. The dwarf's body swayed accordingly and was unable to remain standing, causing his buttocks to fall to the floor. Only at this moment did he discover that the man had used both hands and legs to assault the golden barrier like a squall. His current golden barrier was the same as kneaded dough. With the opponent's punches and kicks creating new dents, bulges and warped deformations on the barrier, it seemed that the layer of golden light could break at any moment underneath the martial uncle's fierce assault. Seeing this, Monk Golden Light's expression drastically changed. Flustered, he was no longer capable of maintaining the poise of an immortal master, and instead proceeded to chant an incantation. Unfortunately, he had made many errors in this hurried attempt, so there wasn't the slightest result. That black box hadn't moved even a jolt. In the back, Jia Tianlong saw everything and was somewhat amazed. On one hand, he was amazed by Monk Golden Light's idiotic actions and obliviousness. On the other hand, he felt awe as he witnessed the martial prowess belonging to Wang Juechu's martial uncle, who could test the power of the golden barrier belonging to Monk Golden Light. The barrier could truly be considered impervious to sword and spear. Water and fire couldn't penetrate it either, similar to its ineffectiveness against a diamond-hard shield. Unexpectedly, this golden barrier was trembling greatly under this person's punches and kicks, and accumulated deformations according to the martial uncle's wishes.